Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today for the penultimate episode in our Summer of Blockbusters series, myself and the good old Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp are deep diving into Avatar and Avatar The Way of Water. Yes, we have a Na'vi James Cameron double feature, and as you can tell by the length of this episode, we go pretty in depth with these babies. I mean, we watched 3 different cuts of the original film, we both rewatched The Way of Water, and we have a lot to say. If you're sick and tired of Jack and I just agreeing on every film, you're lucky today because we don't agree on these movies, and we have a pretty deep therapy session into why Jack has an issue with these films, ultimately how we think it progresses as a franchise, and what our expectations are as the series continues. Quite literally, Avatar is the #1 grossing film worldwide of all time, so for the Summer of Blockbusters series, of course we had to talk about these two, and I think this is a very fun episode. But we have a lot to get into. This is a long episode, so no more dilly-dallying. Let's get into our reviews of Avatar and Avatar The Way of Water. Okay, Jack, and here for the penultimate episode of our Summer of Blockbuster series. We are deep diving into Avatar. I think more than probably anyone ever has on a podcast, so I want the respect. James Cameron, if you want to send us to the premiere of the new one, I feel down for that after everything I've been through. Let's start our conversation. We're talking obviously today about Avatar and Avatar The Way of Water. Let's start with the original film. Let's go back to 2009, our first time on Pandora with Avatar. Just quickly getting into the numbers, because of course this did incredibly well. This is the #1 highest grossing film of all time. Originally was scheduled for May 2009, then got bumped to December because they couldn't get the shots done. Final shots were completed a month before release. So working on a quick timetable, to be honest. This was really notable for its 3D. Obviously that was a major part of marketing. 90% of all advanced ticket sales were for 3D showings of the film. But you know, in the box office, the world exists. A giant blizzard hit the East Coast. Multiple markets were not able to really have showings of this. And it made it kind of interesting, like not that impressive of an opening weekend. Definitely not bad. It was the 40th largest in North American history, the second highest for December. But what we're talking about here is legs. The second week, it only drops 1.8%, which is like unheard of. It takes 19 days for the film to pass 1 billion. It keeps showing until like August of 2010. Has very, very good legs at the box office. Again, the highest grossing film of all time. Very briefly lost it to a film we'll talk about in the future, but did regain it back. And kind of one story of this is also a lot of re-releases, a lot of versions, which I'm sure we'll get into. This is a film that continually went back to theaters, even as recent as right before Way of Water, and continuing just to grow that overall gross and become, again, the highest grossing film of all time. Jack, we both entered Pandora. Well, I watched 3 full versions of this film. You watched 2. We really deep dived into this, so I cannot wait to get into this. Jack, why don't you start us off? What are your thoughts, opening thoughts, and relationship with Avatar?
Well, I remember, and I don't mind saying this because I don't want it to come across like I don't know what I'm on about, but I actually didn't watch this at the cinema. I wasn't interested. In 2009, it came to me where I was leaving primary school and going to secondary school. So I was about 10 or 11, 12 at that time. I think at 11 and 12. And Avatar to me, in the pre-promotional material, especially when it was sort of this silhouette with the sort of light shining on the skin, and you saw these like stars. It just didn't impress me at all. Wasn't interested. I think, especially after like the Dark Knight and like especially after the Dark Knight in 2008, and then before that with the World's End in 2007. I think I think the sort of the palette for me sort of changed a little bit. I went from a little bit of a childlike of wanting to watch cinema to watching like really sort of stronger, more thematically worthy pictures that I thought would be more for my time. And then my palette opened up, and Avatar didn't really sit into that. So I remember buying this on DVD at an Asda, which is like the Walmart in England, with the Hurt Locker, which released around the same time. And they both came with so much hype. And I always found the Hurt Locker to be far more interesting than Avatar. Ironically, both go up. Catherine Bigelow and James Cameron have a history. They go up against Best Directors in 2009. So it's an interesting one. But for the longest time, Avatar to me just simply wasn't really interesting. I still have a very strange relationship, which we'll get into with it later. But I remember not watching it in the cinema. I watched it on DVD. I think I have the theatrical version of it, and then in England, I think it's the same in the US. There's like a 3 disc collector's edition that came out. I didn't watch the re-release in 2010 because it doesn't interest me again. And again, you've got like it was starting with the Marvel stuff. So for me, I think my palette just changed completely. And then I picked up the Blu-ray box, which I think is in the other room, but I have the DVD here. I've got the DVD and the Blu-ray because I am a stan. Let's just get that capital S. I have the DVD version of this and the Blu-ray, but I've been watching it on repeat. Um, where do I don't even know where to start with this. The Blu-ray, the collector's edition, which I think I bought in like 2012, 2013, on the big OLED televisions, the LGs. When I first got into Blu-ray, it sort of was the sign of the times to get that, and I think that type of idea, that identity of getting the Blu-ray of Avatar to watch on a big screen, has ultimately resounded. Excuse me, it's ultimately come to fruition that's the reason why I think this feature is as popular at the time, and it probably has the legs that it has purely on a visual stimulation level. Um, each time I watch this, I think there's always someone who says, "Oh, it looks amazing." I think I'm going to have that in my program notes as well. I always come back to this as an identity where if I have a new television, I will put on there's certain few films to get that brightness, that color injection. I have a LED TV with the lights on the back. I've had for ages, but I just never really used because I usually work away. And I always put the things on when watching the Alien series recently. I've been doing it, and this is just beautiful. It's blue, it's green, it's gorgeous colours, gorgeous textures. But for me, it's always been a visual stimulation. I've never found Avatar, uh, the whole series, to be anything but just a visual feast. And I remember my mum and dad was like going to buy TVs at the time, like between like 2009 and 2015 or something. I always go with them just to make sure they get the right fucking thing. And Avatar was always that, always on the Sony preview players where you have these bright high contrast colors, and it was always that thing where it was just, again, not to reiterate, but that stimulation. So for me, I've never been integrated within this world. It came too late for me in my pre-pubescent, because I was becoming an adolescent at that time. It wasn't my Lord of the Rings. It wasn't my that type of era, the Star Wars before it. It was too late to be anything like that. So it came at a very strange time for me. Um, I remember that if you're into like games, I remember that there's like a PlayStation, Xbox game that came with it. I think it was like Frontier of Pandora or something. It didn't excite me. Nothing around this whole franchise gives me the immersion, the engagement. I'll probably throw it to you because you might have a different relationship, but for me, I still struggle with that idea of what's the identity of this, because to me it goes back to the visual cinematic quality. I don't find anything astounding or thematically endearing in the quality of this type of work, and we'll get on to something that I find even worse a little bit later. But it was fun to go back and watch this in the TV, sat on my own watching it in the big on the 65-inch television, HDR ramped up. I have the 4K on my TV, on Apple TV. Have the box sets, lovely picture quality. So it was lovely to watch, and I haven't seen this in a long time. A long time, I think. And this is probably going to add a little bit strength to what you asked me. From '09 and '10, I haven't seen this, and probably I think until 2022, and maybe 2 or 3 months before the sequel came out, and that's probably a 10-year gap almost for me, where I just wasn't really interested. So I hope that gives a bit more context to it. But I'm interested to what your relationship is.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't have much of a relationship, to be clear. Didn't really watch this, obviously, on a release. I watched it on Disney Plus maybe like in 2019 randomly, and it didn't do much for me at home. I was watching it just on my TV. I was like, that didn't really do much. But
Mm-hmm.
before Way of Water, I was like, if I'm going to engage with this series, I might as well properly watch the first one. So I went to the theater for the re-release, Dolby Cinema 3D. And it hits. I really like Avatar and Avatar 2. I think this might be one where we disagree a little bit. I don't necessarily think it's like the best film in the world, but undeniably kind of what we talked about with like even Alien Romulus, if you want to go back to that a week or two ago. It works on the spectacle level where the visuals are fantastic, especially seeing them on the big screen. It's one of those situations where you can only get so much of it on the small screen. The CGI is fantastic. I just think like the iconography is really fun. The floating mountains, all the creatures, the when it goes night, everything glows. That all hits on like this roller coaster visual spectacle, as you're kind of mentioning. Um, Vein of cinema, blockbuster cinema, which is good. But I do also appreciate the characters. I appreciate the story. I appreciate the emotions. I think James Cameron, I also am just like, I know he's quite a controversial person, which we've talked about. I'm sure we will talk about. I'm very like deep on like drinking the Kool-Aid as far as James Cameron as a filmmaker, at least with his ideology of what he wants to put on screen. So to take this story, which follows a lot of the very similar story beats and emotional beats you would find in the stories that cover like colonization and those themes. And I think it's really smart to put it on an alien world. I think that creates an interesting relationship between the viewer and the actual content they are witnessing. I don't think it's groundbreaking, but I think it is ultimately effective. Maybe, especially in the third act, I think that it can be a little bit drawn out, but I think it overall deserves its runtime. And especially in the theater, this is not one of those where I'm going to walk away and say, like, that was life changing, but it is one that has kind of like that booyah quality of cinema that I appreciate at times because
Mhm.
I like to have fun in the film or in the cinema. But I think it also has the emotional worth to where like compare this to like a lot of, let's say, MCU projects. There is something here, and James Cameron met with indigenous people, was seemed to be very respectful in that relationship. I appreciate that, and I appreciate this film is trying to do something. But also, this is James Cameron fresh out of the submarine. He spent a decade in the submarine. This is him. Like, you can watch his 2005, I forget what it's called, documentary of him going down there, and his like he cannot believe what he's seeing. It's like he's experiencing alien life forms for the first time. I appreciate that. Then he went and put that on the big screen, and I think in this, and especially in the sequel, it works well in that way too. So I have a lot of love for Avatar. Again, not maybe my favorite film of all time, but I do appreciate this.
Yeah, I mean, it is, to reiterate, I think it is a visual treat. It really is. I think it still holds up, which I think is probably arguably one of the most shocking attributes it still has. That there are occasions that it's, oh, okay, there's a bit of background texture there, especially towards the end when they're walking off to back onto the ship. There's like, oh, you can tell there's a little bit of a quality shake in there. But I think for a film that's sort of like, what, 20, 25 years old, oh, not 25, 15, sorry. Jesus, I said my age then. I was like, whoa, what? For a 15-year-old film to be at, and bear in mind, I think, not to digress here, but we've spoken about an attribute within the Summer of Blockbuster season about usually we're watching the first of some kind. I think Star Wars was one, Jurassic Park was one, and usually it's quite rare. And I think we've mentioned this in Jurassic Park as well. Is that the iteration of the first kind of something usually has issues with age. I think the Phantom Menace is one. I think Jurassic Park in the next 10 years will, I think it's starting to deteriorate slightly, but it still holds up because of the cinematic quality to it. But usually when we're watching things, there's either the Jaws method of going practical and limitation, and then we go to the Star Wars where it's like in your face, in your face. And that idea about how the blockbuster then holds up. I think this, bar perhaps Jaws, and even more so than like the Lord of the Rings, which I think is showing its age a little bit now. Fellowship of the Ring and what we did. I definitely think this is the one where, as a 15-year gap to the technology that we've got now, and we've got the sequel to talk about after, I think it's held up incredibly well. I think visually it's an absolute feast. It's to devour. The color, the texture here, it's so rich, it's so engaging. But these are all themes I come back to where and I tried to I explain it when you go in to buy a TV and this is on. This to me feels like a 3 hour tech demo, and I don't want that to sound patronising or in fact like a backhanded compliment to it. But I do think it's one of those things where I tried to mention this slightly in Titanic, but I know you wanted to sort of withhold the conversation about with Cameron because we were going to get to this. But I think Titanic was the beginning of I'm going to make something visual here and narratively that'll just take care of itself. And because I think allowing your performances in Titanic, especially to have really good dynamic and charisma and charm between DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, I think that holds its own because it's really strong and everything else just comes together. I think when you go back to True Lies before it, you've got this visual treat, but the story, the narrative, because of the performances and the engagement, the charisma, is still there. This one, I think, is a little bit different in its relationship for me. I think this is the one where I'm like, you don't have the affordability here for your performances, because you're not hiding them, but you're evolving them to a visual treat, like you are your visual imagery in general. So it's the one that comes really full circle for him. And I think, looking back at it, I've got a bit of hot takes to say about the performances here, but I'll leave that just a little bit whenever you want to come back down to it. But it was really interesting watching the theatrical cut, um, because I think, very much like director's cuts and theatrical cuts, usually the theatrical is what you see the presentation in the cinema, and then the DVD takes hold, and then that's what takes precedent. Notably, like Close Encounters, director's cuts, quite hard to find the theatrical. There's a lot of stuff out there. Robin Hood, the Ridley Scott version and stuff. It's always usually quite difficult. But the theatrical here is still quite an interesting venture to watch. I still have like slight issues with that. If you want to, we'll get into that a bit later with specifics, I suppose. But it was interesting to go back and watch the demo reel and have a look at not demo reel, but have to look at essentially what is a demo reel for the next 15 years of the future within CGI. So it's interesting as a time capsule as well, I find. But I think, like you said, as a film, it's definitely fun. I don't want to come across like I'm like, oh, this was so painful to watch. It's not. It's 2 hours 40. Everything really is that length anyway now, within the corporate machine of the blockbuster. But it is very fun. It's very engaging. It's very abstract. It's immersive. Visually, it's a treat. I think thematically, it's quite interesting, as you said. There's a little bit hit and miss there for me. I think which I think a lot of other people have made mention with at the time, is a different context, whereas now we're afforded to have those conversations now in society about white savior and stuff. But they're just small dents. But I'll throw it back to you where you want to go next. But I agree with you. I didn't get to see. I don't know if the 2022 re-release was available for me. I probably wouldn't have watched it anyway. But like I said, I just have no valiant interest in this material. I don't know what it is. Even watching it now, I'm like, this is like really fun to watch, but I just don't care, and I'm not too sure what that is. I don't know if it's my idea of visual practical effects become computer generated. I don't know if it's that, where my emotive immersion just dissipates because it just doesn't feel real to me. There's an uncanny valley. I mean, I don't know what else to say aside from maybe one last sort of smack across the face here would be, this would be a great feature for me to show people the quality of Blu-ray and the quality of the television, the projection that you have. I don't think I would ever show this to someone in an environment where this is the next step forward in cinema. It's just so strange to me, but I would not discount the fact of what importance this has. This is going to be more of a therapy session for me. I can feel that, so I'm hoping that you're going to be my my therapist here, but I don't put too much on your shoulders. The cornerstones of cinema, with the canon that we've mentioned throughout ClapperCast, we've mentioned Uncut Gems. It's always that, as someone who is into cinema, you've got to mention the stepping stones. You get to the likes of The Last Starfighter with CGI, and then you get to the young Sherlock Holmes, and you get into stuff like this. We have to look at the progression of CGI in cinema, and I think when you look at this, it feels like a gigantic leap. And now this is going to sound like quite an oxymoronic statement, but I think the CGI is so good here in places. I actually don't see it as the missing as the greatest link between then and now. And I think that's, if that's towards its strength, I hope it comes across like that. Because to me, I remember being if anyone out there, I went to college and I studied film studies, film theory. And then I did it at university for 3 years. And then I did a master's degree in it. So for a long time of my, I know that sounds like really egotistical, but for a long time of my life, I think I've studied film to a point where, from about around about 2010, a year before, after this, I've studied cinema quite in depth. Obviously, we do this every week, and there's always this educational form of how cinema is progressing. We spoke about AI, and I just having the blessing of being able to come on here and talk to you, and or anyone about that matter, and write about it. This is a constant level of being educated, because it's so quick now. And I remember going back to like 2010 and 11, there was a lot of discussion about this after the fact. And I remember one of my tutors said that this is actually an animated film. And I remember we would always have debates about this, and I remember sort of thinking, like, what the fuck are you talking about? How can you consider this to be an animated film when you've got practical effects, you've got background, which essentially becomes the volume in later years. But you've got a lot of practical stuff here, which I want to mention later on because it's one thing I noticed about this, which I thought was brilliant later on. But I always found that to be quite an unworthy statement. As I've got older and I look at this, I'm still in two thoughts of mind if that's actually true or not. It's one question that's probably because it was like the first of many of, like, when you get into that prism and there's those discussions, those sort of stuff stays with you for a while. I don't know if that's just me with the psychological thing where I'm stuck there, but I look at it now and I'm thinking, like, this is so good. Is it so good that I don't see the seams? Is it so good that when I'm watching someone who is flying as a CGI character, who is not there, it's all pre-viz and then it's done on a digital manifestation? Like, I think your brain, it's the first one where my brain comprehends, like, is this real? Like, I don't see this as the seismic shift in what we get, because we're later in the years, because we did Fellowship of the Ring, and obviously Gollum's not ready there, and we spoke about this relationship with Avatar. That's ultimately the catalyst that causes them, right? 04 go into production. 07, I'm going to do some I think it's 05, he actually does a $10 million test to show to Fox. That, I don't think that footage has ever been seen. I would love to see that $10 million test footage, because I remember that the South Korean actress who was in Lost played one of the Na'vi in that, and I'd love to see that and see where the evolution came from. But I think it's so seamless as a positive. I don't see the seismic shift. That sounds like a really stupid comment to make. I appreciate that, because it's like, well, you're saying it's so good, it's a negative. Not necessarily. I just think that it's for me. If it came out now and we push for everything forward, and 09 is now, let's say, I think at my age now I'd have a lot more appreciation for it. But at the time, it just sort of came and went, and I didn't get the immersion for it. And seeing it now and seeing everything else, it blurs a little bit to me, which again is purely a subjective issue. So I don't want to fall it on the film too much, but it very much is a genuine perplexing property to look at. That it's an original IP. It was, again, faltered with starts. I think a lot of people thought, like, what is he doing? He put a lot of money into this. I think he made $384 million off profit off this because he took gross. He brings, Sigourney Weaver back after Aliens, which is, because they didn't have a very good relationship after, I believe it or not. I'm not too sure about that. I think it's more so Winslet in the next one. But he brings in Zoe Saldana, which is, she's playing Lieutenant Uhura in Star Trek, but she's not massive because she was in The Terminal, but she's not a big actress. Sam Worthington, who is he? Stephen Lang, the guy of Manhunter, or even Tombstone. It's all a very strange concoction, and it's one of those things where we say you just can't doubt him. You really can't doubt him. For it all to work as good as it does, to me, it's just one of those experiences where I wish I was more mature. I wish I was older when I was watching it to really appreciate it, but unfortunately, I wasn't, and I think that it just sort of floated me by a little bit.
Now it's really gotten onto you're on the therapist couch side.
Yeah, I'm gonna lie down in a minute.
It's okay to start crying that you didn't see this when you were older.
No,
okay.
That's okay. We'll get to it later.
It is a very strange franchise, though, because also, like, it died, like, from 2011, let's say, to like 2018. It's not like this had a big cultural impact. It's not like this was necessarily like people talking about, even when Avengers Endgame was coming out, there was a lot of people who were like, why is it Avatar? No one even knows the characters from that. No one knows the story of that. That was something that came out in 2009 and then kind of culturally died. And now we've seen this, like, try to be brought back into a franchise with these new films. We now have Avatar theme parks. We now have Avatar just trying to make it more of like a quote unquote like franchise for modern. It's very odd when you look at it. I will say I think go for it.
No. I just want you to finish that, and I'm going to say something that's going to shock you. But just go on. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was going on a new point. So if you have something, I would love if you would go for it.
This might shock you. This, and it comes down to Way of the Water. But the issue I have about, we're talking about franchise. I find this very interesting. I have such a weird relationship with these two films because I don't see them as such. I've never felt this as a franchise because of that gap, which we'll get to a lot later. So I don't want to jump the gun here, but you chose not to do Phantom Menace because we did Star Wars, which I think is a good choice because we'd be here for like 9 days because obviously I did the Star Wars thing. But do you know how long it was between Return of the Jedi and the Phantom Menace? The gap, the
How long was
generational,
it?
15 years. It's the same gap as Avatar and Avatar 2. Now, I don't know if you, because you obviously you weren't old enough, and I don't think I was really either, but you look at that difference where people went back to the cinema after 15 years, after seismic differences in the cinematic quality, the blockbuster, what we spoke about. And I think the two effects are seismically different. I think people went mad in 1998 to 1999, and I think Phantom Menace made a lot of money, but it didn't make this money, which I think inflation would maybe perhaps change. I'm not too sure. But the difference there is that was built upon 3 films. And granted, you go into another trilogy, but Avatar felt like this shift where, like, oh my god, there's going to be a sequel. The 15-year gap is not one that feels conscious, whereas Lucas did. I think Cameron is more like, I need to make 5 movies. I just think it just goes off. We'll get there, but it goes off the rails. But the social uh, discourse just to me feels really flat. They seem to come out and just not and do really big numbers, which I feel like there needs to be an accountant somewhere to make that up, because I still to this day don't understand that how these two made this much money. We'll get to that later. This is just a prologue, but I just think that they come out and they just bang, like you said. They don't die on arrival. That sounds a little bit silly, but they live. It's like the Roy Batty thing. A candle that burns twice as bright. Burns twice as short. And I think it's one of those things where there are these cultural impacting features on the surface, but they don't actually add anything to the canon. And to me, Way the Water, the 15-year gap, I thought that would be monumental. We don't see anyone in t-shirts. You don't see anyone in comic books, novels, and stuff. You don't see video games, TV shows. There doesn't seem to me to be that seismic. And I'll stop using that word soon, don't worry. But there doesn't seem to be that monumental shift into like, wow, this is the canon now. Whereas I think the progression and the cinematic quality is the one that's like the influence, which goes back to my point earlier about it being more so a demo reel than it being an actual immersive, engaging narrative story. So I think ultimately it proves my point in the long run that these don't really have. God, it's going to turn into influence, which I find probably adds that discourse that we speak about the blockbuster just not really having a soul anymore. They just seem to come out. Everyone flocks to them because they're these monumental achievements, and no one really stays for the characters. And I think we're going to get that again next weekend as well. I feel like that's just this discourse that has unravelled post Jurassic Park, where, and maybe not so the 09 version, but more so the latter, where in terms of Avatar, sorry, where we just get this shift into, let's go watch something visually interesting. And I know Max Sans Vincent, friend of the show, comes on quite a lot. He says that cinema is a visual medium, and I completely upheld that. I think that's true. And I think one of the things about Avatar is that it's just such a feast for the eyes. It's so different that it's this monumentous achievement. Let's go watch it. But they don't live very long, and I think of everything we've spoke about, there's a point post 2000 for me where things just change, and this is definitely a part of that. But I hope that didn't derail much. But I'm interested to go where you go after this.
No, I think you're right. I mean, obviously, well, shout out first to those who had post-Avatar depression syndrome, which was a big thing where people would
I
review
heard
Avatar
about
and then
this.
felt
I
depressed.
I couldn't believe that's true. That's crazy.
So I
Thoughts
don't
and
want to
prayers to
discredit
those
them.
people.
Right. I just want to say ClapperCast stands with you. We're not trying to make fun of your medical condition. But I agree. And I think, though, also part of that is like, well, yes, this is technically really inventive, you could say, and really impressive. The characters in the narrative are very basic, are very
Hmm.
standard, right? Jake Sully is not a fascinating character with a ton of personality. He's a very like one-dimensional, this is him. Every character in this is very one-dimensional in this story that's following a narrative that we've seen countless times before in the history of cinema. It's not like this is presenting a story or in providing that depth, to where like that's a very inventive thing that's going to stick with you. I totally get why this would be an interesting, again, visual experience. And even though the story I don't think is bad, I think when you look at the history of film, this is not going to stand out that much. So I totally get that side of it. I do want to mention performances because you brought that up earlier,
Oh,
because I think
please,
that
yeah.
is where I don't know where you're going to go with this, but I think most of the performances here are pretty strong. Sam Worthington is fine. I guess he's there. But like Stephen Lang, especially in Zoe Saldana, I must say I appreciate both their performances a lot. And they take these characters that are very one dimensional, never go beyond that. But I think they gave them enough personality to where, like, if I think back to Avatar, I will be able to at least identify what their performances were doing and say they did a good job. I don't know if you have a different take because you said you have some hot takes, so I'm excited to
Uh,
hear them.
mine are pleasantly, surprisingly positive here for a change. I actually watched back this was more wood for Worthington in the sense of that seeing the career just sort of after Terminator Salvation come out at the same time as this, and seeing his output compared to Saldana, which I'll mention a little bit shortly. I think he's probably on the weaker side in the fact of like he didn't he didn't really pick up the pace. And after this, there was sort of cherry drops of stuff, but never. He wasn't very. He wasn't a leading man. He hasn't done anything really that's been surprising. But I think he had a really good turn in Horizon Chapter One, because I think he's allowed to just not have the weight on his shoulders there. That being said, I thought it was very good here, and it shocked me because, like I said, going into it, I was more sort of this is going to be interesting to hold up because I haven't seen the theatrical cut in quite some time, and I thought that because reading the backstory here, I think it was Jake Gyllenhaal. No, Jake Gyllenhaal declined it. So did Matt Damon for Gross as well, which is mad because I know Matt Damon always brings that up. And maybe you should have done that, Matt. But the three were Chris Evans, Chris Pratt, and Sam Worthington. And all out of the three of them, it's ironic that the one that was chosen here, probably you could argue, hasn't had the most prosperous career compared to the other two. But I have to say that I think going into this, it's perfectly cast in the there's like this green-eyed envy where this guy is so wonderfully naive within this world, and he acts the eyes and ears of the character through the audience. It sort of hits because he's an unknown, and I think it works incredibly well in that stage of, especially not watching this a long time. I feel that affection. I don't want to go too deep in emotional immersion because I've sort of declined that as being a reality for me here. But I do think that's the weight of the weight of the substance here is that I think that the gap that I've had to view this, that experience going through his character really sort of opened up for me a lot more. And I think the range he shows is not particularly outstanding, but I think the identity he proposes here, especially how he becomes climatized to things and he not indoctrinated, but he also becomes within one of the Navi people, and the double side sword of that of the other issues that's going to cause. You want him to explore. You want to be open about. You want him to like have the use of his legs. You want him to explore this world, and you can see it affecting him in the positive. And obviously, the substance of that and how that becomes detrimental to the cause later on, I think is really worthy of Sam Worthington's performance. There's just small bits here where, like, he's sort of laughing and smiling, and that you just sort of appreciate that openness and the level of like hope for that character, which we'll get onto the collector's edition, which I think emphasizes that even more so. Whereas the theatrical cut just starts and throws you in the shit, which I don't think is necessarily fair for that performance as well. But we'll get to that a bit later. I think Saldana is brilliant here. There's a scene towards the end where she's flying with Jake Sully and she looks and she has the face paint on, and I actually think it's beautiful. She looks stunning in real life anywhere, but in this film, I think there's like this. The eyes are huge. There's texture. There's like this watery surrounding on them. They look huge. She looks like a puppy in deer headlights because she's in love. And I think that where do we cross the line with visual performance there and CGI enhancement? That's a discussion we'll probably have to get through this podcast. But I think she's terrific here. I think she's a character that has a really interesting arc, if not probably underwritten slightly, because there's a lot where she's just responsive to a lot of stuff, as those characters would be as we follow Jake Sully. So I appreciate that, but there's a hell of a substance there with a sister that we'll get into another collector's edition, the other cut of the film. You can see where I'm going with this, I hope. But I think she's fantastic. The one for me, looking back, is Stephen Lang. I don't know if you've seen a lot of Stephen Lang stuff or even the audience had, but Stephen Lang of late, watch Stephen Lang was the in Manhunter, the Michael Mann movie where he played like this. He's a Philip Seymour Hoffman character in Red Dragon, where he's like this piece of shit photojournalist, 4'5" almost in stature and height, terrible human being. Then I remember watching him in Tombstone, where he's this another piece of shit, was like 5'6", terrible human being, horrible. This underneath nasty little man who cries wolf all the time and then crafts all this evil on other people. I couldn't believe that it was the same actor. Watching him here, he looks 6'8". The camera work here to make his stature with his screen presence, I think, is fantastic. He's a very worthy villain here. He's horrible, but you don't hate him as a like as necessarily as a human being. So we know nothing of him. We hate him because of the actions that he causes, because he shows no remorse in his malice, which again goes back onto the archetype character that we're going to talk about a bit later with how these are sort of all written. But I thought he was fabulous. I sort of in 2009, I was slightly shocked that they got rid of him. Part of me feels like they should have done now, but I do like that idea of just Stephen Lang being sort of this brilliant brute, and he is a force to be reckoned with, both tactically and physically. I do hope in an alternate multiverse out there for all like MCU fans. I would have liked to have seen Michael Biehn have a stab at this, because I think Michael Bihn's never really been afforded the big role. Granted, Terminator and Aliens, but he was never sort of given, and Tombstone as well, which is funny enough. I just don't think he was ever given that massive big statement. I would have liked to have seen Arnold Schwarzenegger in that role as well. I just think it'd have been interesting for him to play with Michael Biehn or Arnie again in a big blockbuster like this. But granted, I think it takes away from, or that's Arnie chasing, like, who's that guy who blew? So I appreciate that idea, but I thought Stephen Lang was excellent. Support, I'll probably throw that back to you, because to me, it's the one thing I'm like, some of the delivery of Sigourney Weaver's lines, I'm like, oh, okay, okay, strange. The other supporting cast to me are just sort of caricatures. They don't really add anything. They're just background noise. Giovanna Ribson are just like unatanium, whatever it's called. It's like, okay. They're all just very much caricature background noise to me a little bit. But I think everything is performance is wise. I'm just wondering what you thought about Worthington going back to this after saying 15 years of a career that I think we both would admit hasn't been great of output.
Yeah, I mean, I get why he went back, and I'm happy. Like, I'll say that's one thing about, and we'll get to that with Way of Water. I like that they got everyone back. Maybe some people, we can talk narratively bringing them back, but I get why he brought back. It's not like he's done a ton, and I think honestly, he gives probably the strongest work in Way of Water from what I've seen. Yeah, I like that choice. I will say I agree with the supporting cast. Michelle Rodriguez is really bringing that Fast and Furious energy, I would
Oh
say, and
god, I
I don't
forgot
mean
about
that in
her.
necessarily the best of ways. Definitely is like, okay, we're bringing that there. Sigourney Weaver is going to be one of my negatives throughout this franchise. Again, we'll talk about it, or this series, whatever you want to call it. We'll talk about that more in Way of Water. I think she stands out in both films as being kind of an odd choice and kind of an odd presence. But I do think, especially, I mean, the Sam Worthington, I'd say, chemistry with Zoe Saldana, I really want to like highlight, as I think their chemistry is kind of the core to all of this, especially we'll get to Way of Water and with the family stuff. But that is like one of the emotional cores of this film, and I think that works exceptionally well. But I'm happy. I mean, it's sad also that Sam Worthington came back to Avatar still after the second one, doesn't seem to be doing much. I don't know why. Just Hollywood refuses to do much with this guy. It kind of reminds me, we had that conversation last year about District 9, blanking on his name now, but the actor from District
Shalto
9.
Coppola, yeah.
Yeah. And it was like, well, he's great. I would love to see him do more stuff, because I think he could evolve and grow really beautifully, and then just it doesn't happen outside of smaller projects. That seems to be the case with Sam Worthington. Sad. But I'm happy he's back, and hopefully he continues to get his dues for as many Avatar films as he's in. But the supporting cast, I would agree with, is pretty weak.
Yeah.
Maybe it's, yeah, go for it.
No, I could only think that maybe he took points, didn't take took gross instead of points and gross instead of an upfront like $1.5 million deal. So maybe, excuse me, maybe that's the reason why I think like Guy Pearce just made his money and was like, I'll just do stuff I want to do now. Maybe it's that, but I also think that like from the being like the production of what this was, like to start shooting in 2007, to like not really get it done until excuse me, before 2009. Even that when you said in the opening about not really getting it done even in the year that it was released properly. Um, I think it probably would kill a lot of people within wanting to do anything like that again. But I'm only surmising now. I would only presume.
But we also see like Stephen Lang, I think, got a lot of recognition for this role. He didn't really do much after this. I mean, he did Don't Breathe, and that's good. He's done like small roles here and there, but he's not really blown up after this. Zoe Saldana did. She went on and did Guardians of the Galaxy. Ironically, we'll be talking about her next week. It just doesn't seem like one of those movies, which we've talked about in a lot of these franchises. I mean, this kind of sounds like a broken record at this point, where it's like you have this big film, but a lot of these pieces don't necessarily go on to launch these giant careers from it. I don't think it helps that you're covered in CGI. I'll say
Yeah,
that. Um, that's not beneficial if you're a big blue alien, but it's kind of weird. Something to note. Maybe it's a
but
good time to
yeah,
get into, or go for it. Go for it.
yeah. No, I was just going to say to reiterate a point I made earlier. I think because we've got 1 week left, I think we're coming down to the answers to the questions we proposed when we first started this, and throughout this series of like what gravitates towards a blockbuster. What do we actually take from it? And I think it is the treat of visualization. I think it's when people go to a blockbuster. I have to say, I don't think people go for the actor anymore. I think when you can get the two intertwined, like you do with the Tom Cruise thing, and you did years and years ago with the Bruce Willis and Arnie and Sylvester Stallone. And not this in a blockbuster, but the action genre when they meld, the blockbuster and the person. I think it's a far more difficult relationship because the two sort of not necessarily negate each other, but what brings them together, what reason. And I think the blockbuster is almost now. I think we have to admit this is a visual medium. It's just one of those things where it's so expressive in visual or narrative comprehension if we're not seen it before, if it's technologically advanced, or it's just thematically something different, or it's tonally something different, and that ultimately becomes of why it blows up. But I think this is the clearest indication of such of that when we look at the Star Wars, like what did Carrie Fisher ever do? What did Mark Hamill do? To the degree, and granted, you can say, well, they're not going to do two Star Wars in their career. The equivalent, should have said. Obviously, I know they did three. And I think that's granted, fair enough. I think you get one big shot, and that, for a lot of people, that's enough. Other people get multiple. It is what it is. I think that's just, we'll get onto in a different day. But I think that this is probably the answer to the question that I think was being raised throughout this conversation is that I think Avatar undoubtedly, and especially with what we're going to talk about next week, I think it's interesting how ironic that we are going to have this talk now, where it really does feel appropriate next week. So I won't go into it too much, of course. But I do think this cements the idea and ultimately the answer that people are not really here for the actors. This is just served up as pure entertainment. And because they're so good at being this whisking us away, we sort of subconsciously neglect it as a reality. Nobody sort of identifies, oh, that's Richard Dreyfuss or Roy Scheider, or my God, that's Mark Hamill. That's just Luke Skywalker. That's Hopper. You know, that's Brody. They're so established in being so good at inviting us into a different world. Subconscious goes to conscious and back and forth, and we forget about the reality that these are performances watching us on a big screen, and that's probably a testament to the powers of how they're made. But undoubtedly, if there's any idea of any example to showcase of how big this was, you would have thought, being the big $1 billion question that it is, these three probably would have been booked up forever. And maybe like I said, that maybe they've got the conversation out about, well, I've done that massive spectacle. I want to do something a bit different. But Zoe Saldana's kept on making the same sort of engineered product in a sense of the MCU, Star Trek. She's had like the three big ones, you know, and but she's immensely talented, and she's gone from hiding herself within blue and green to being a human being in Star Trek, probably being one of the best roles. Worthington is another one where you think like, oh, you know, why isn't he playing, you know, the next Luke Skywalker? But I think this is it. So I don't know. That's where I come down for it. But again, it depends how we see that. I don't know if you feel the same way, but to me, it's like this ultimately just definitely answer that question for me about where how good this actual visual medium is. It blurs the line of like I tell you something now, right? You know, you have that friend where you watch a film and like, oh my God, like what's he in? have I seen him before? You show this to anyone. I just don't think they ask that. If I showed this to my mom, because my mom always like, who's that? Have I seen that person before? No one asks that about this because you're so indebted to the actual creativity of the CGI. You see past the identity of them being human beings playing roles, which is has a prosperity to the actual material because again, it takes you to Pandora. Like that's unquestionable. But it's interesting. Then again, what's the role of the actor then? Because could it not then be AI, which we're talking about? We're going to talk about in the next like 10 years. That's what I mean when I said earlier about this being. It's interesting to look at this as seamless that it is and what questions it brings up for the future. But I'll probably leave that there until next week, I suppose, because that's where we get into really interesting conversations.
Yeah. We'll talk about it more next week. It also raises an interesting question. And Avatar is like a weird like wedge in this, but like what then sells a film to be a blockbuster if it's not the actors, if it's not the story, I think we can say from this. And when you talk about like the modern logic of like remakes and sequels, and there's this fight where people are like, we want original IP. Granted, Avatar did it. Granted, I think Avatar is a very technical once in a lifetime thing.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work? We'll talk about it more next
Yeah,
week, obviously, with
yeah, no, yeah,
MCU.
it'd be really interesting. Yeah,
The whole thing.
yeah.
I think let's keep going with Avatar. Let's talk about the different cuts of Avatar because I did not watch 9 hours of Avatar just to skip over that. I watched all three versions. You watched the collector's cut and the theatrical
Theatrical cut.
version, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes. Why don't you start off with those two, and then I
Oh,
will interject with that
thank,
and the special
oh,
edition.
thank you. Yeah, because the special edition, the 2022 release that you saw, is actually a different cut as well. I found out, but we'll get to that
Yes.
later. So,
So
the idea when we spoke of off air, because we was like having the chat about how do we do this, because we chose one cut of Star Wars, which we felt was beneficial to the conversation because it was the theatrical cut, and we wanted to watch it contextual within the time frame it was released. That felt correct. Titanic, we watched the open mat. We watched the 35mm scan of Jurassic Park. This one feels like the and Jaws is probably a different a different conversation, but and we had the chat about Fellowship of the Ring, which started the conversation here. Which cut do we watch? And we were talking with you and the Italian Nick, and there was like, what do you watch? As someone who goes into that, who's seen it but like wants to watch it for an analytical sense, but wants to be entertained. You've got the open mat, the theatrical, the extended edition. Where do you go then? We had this big chat. This one is different because, well, not so different. It's sort of similar into that. I want to watch all three of them, and I want to know the reason of why they're cut up into three different states. Because the extended and theatrical cut of Lord of the Rings is just like, all right, it's just the commodium for the extra stuff for the fans. You know, they weren't given out on another film program 2 years later to make more money. They were released on video and DVD, and they've had interactions with cinema, but they weren't purposely built for that. They were built for the fans. I have a different opinion of this. I think we both may agree on that, but we'll get to that later. So I really wanted to watch the theatrical cut. I did want to watch the special edition re-release, and I was interested in watching this collector's edition for the alternate versions. So on my journey of self-discovery of Avatar, it came to it came to me in a blue haze dream. No, it came to me that the collector's edition is just 8 more minutes added on from the re-release, and I was like, well, I'm not going to watch the re-release because again we'll get to it when you want to talk about that because I think it's just we'll get to it. But I just wanted to see the massive distances between what he felt was a necessity in 2009 and then what he felt was a necessity in 2011 and the differences between it. And I have to say, it's interesting watching the two and seeing that what, again, to answer the question, what he felt was imperative for him to keep and what was loose for him to finish on. And it's interesting that you bring up Romulus earlier because I've been watching the Alien stuff for August. That was being last mentioned last week, getting really deep into it. And I feel like the cut of Avatar is eerily similar to his 1986 cut of Aliens, where you can watch it and it's fun, but it has a severe lack of character arc. We are presented with what we get, and that's it. And it's the genre of the film that takes you on this journey, and the character stuff is very dotted in between. and there's stuff there for us to surmise and generate a form of engagement with. But it's more so that we can follow something that's very linear. The characters are archetype caricatures in a way, good, bad. The moral ambiguity is not so much rich in these type of films. It's more so you get black and then you get white. And then 1990, he releases a special cut of I don't trust me, I won't be going about Alien too much because we did that a few weeks ago. But in 1990, he adds 15 more minutes, which has more stuff with Ellen Ripley about a child and why she doesn't want to go back, but why she feels like there's nothing left for her. Then you have like the 15 minutes opening with Newt, which her and her brother go with a mother and father. We get to see more of the actual place where it's run with kids. You feel like it's more of a homely place, and the oxymoron of seeing it full of life and then we see it full of death later adds a lot of richness to it. I felt the same is sort of eerily similar here. I think the opening with Jake Sully in England, on Earth, is imperative to make this piece work. I don't know if you felt the same, but for me, when he just wakes up on the ship and we transport to Pandora, to me that's a running time thing where I just wanted to drop us in there and we can get engulfed into Pandora in a eerily similar sense of what Jake is getting engulfed into, of being opening up to a world that's very, very quick, like overload of senses, and it becomes quite surreal on a visual sense, and then we go into it. It works like it did in the 1986 cut of Aliens. It does work, but when you see the bigger fruition of, like, he desperately wants this. Like his life is nothing, and it's down, it's dirty, it's grimy. You get the idea of what the dissonance between Earth being vastly overpopulated and money, economics there, and healthcare, and then you get thrown into this other world. The comparisons, the dissonance there works so much tremendously more with weight. I found, especially with that dire need of emotional immersion that I felt that I was lacking throughout this creative process in general. And then that there are more pieces of texture in the collector's edition. I felt was again desperately needed, especially with Sigourney Weaver's character, where we found out about Zoe Saldana's sister, which feels a bit slightly redundant in the fact that we know that the humans are here, that the peaceful treaty is not really going to work. They're just doing it for a political sense. But it was interesting to see that they've tried it before, and that's why she's very much against Jake and bringing him in, and why they very much don't want to integrate, which I felt was very much just sort of a detrimental of lack of inclusion there, just to get that extra weight for Sigourney's character, especially with her arc, but also just the flavour and richness of these people, and pardon my French, have been fucked over for a lot longer than Jake was there. And I think it's interesting to sort of not villainize Jake in a sense of his actions later on a moral compass, which I think is an interesting take. And then you've got little bits more towards the end where it's just a bit more filler and stuff like that, which I thought was more fun. But again, it's interesting how what he feels detrimental and what doesn't work. And granted, for what is essentially 16 minutes, I mean, seriously, like you're going from 240 to 3 hours. I don't really think that is a big difference. I would have just released the collector's edition as your theatrical cut. The same issue that he's got with the next film we're going to talk about with Way of Water. There's just nothing enough to make an extended edition of that because he put it all in. I think this is just an issue where the as much as I like the theatrical version of, you just get into that story. Someone who doesn't, I tell you this, for someone who doesn't really care for the whole thing, which again, I'm going to sound like I'm going to contradict myself here, that I don't really like this, that I don't really like I like the experience, but I'm not very much bothered about it, but I want more character. Like, again, granted, yeah, everyone's like, you're just not making any sense here. I appreciate that, don't get me wrong. Aren't we all full of oxymorons? Especially the latter half of that that word. But no, I think that if you want to just experience Avatar, I think the theatrical cut does have a place. It feels to me that if I just want to watch it and not be bogged down in all the actual filler, I think the theatrical cut does have a world where I'll watch it again. The collector's edition is one where I really want to sort of go back into this, and I want to spend time with this, and I want to see the Avatar world once again, which I can't see I will do this for a long time because of watching it in such quick fruition. But nevertheless, I do think that both of those cuts work. where I'll probably leave it to you, and I'll probably just begin, and you can take it over from here because I'd love to know your opinion between the two of the cuts here. Actually, do you want to do that first? Do you want to talk about your theatrical cut experience, collector's edition? Because I have a lot to say about that middle one, but I'm interested to you didn't watch it in the cinema either, like I did in '09. So your relationship with these, I'm interested in what you saw the first incarnation of, and if it changed your mind on anything.
So, like I said, my first experience was the 2022 re-release, which I think was the original cut. I don't think it was the extended cut. I think that was the original cut shown, from what I understand.
It has
Um,
one extra scene though. I don't know if this is how good your memory will be. When the humans are leaving Earth, Giovanni Ribisi says it's not over, and he gets back into line. That's not in the theatrical cut, but aside from that one
okay.
weird scene, it's exactly the same. But so your first Avatar was 2022.
Sorry, I watched the theatrical cut. I think in 2020, like one on Disney Plus, but I don't really remember that too much. So
So
2022, yes.
you went almost what 10 years. Your relationship is just very fresh.
Yeah, no, I don't have any like history with Avatar past
Wow.
beyond that. I thought it was. I was like, that's a dumb. Like, I don't. That's dumb. That would be my thing. And then I
Wow.
really like
Okay.
it. But then I
Oh
watched
wow.
obviously the collector's cut and the special cut throughout this week, which was a really fun after work just to throw an Avatar for the third time in a row. And I watched the theatrical cut this week also. I agree pretty much with you on most things. I think the special edition is probably my favorite. The thing about the collector's edition, the beginning on Earth, is I like what that adds character wise and thematically. It kind of, I didn't like the visuals in that. It's this very like Blade Runner world, and for a point where like it's supposed to be Pandora is supposed to be this like revelation visually of like this is crazy. It is kind of weird to start in like this really cool sci-fi world because it just weakens the impact of Pandora. I like just getting to it and being blown away because I'm used to real life world where it's not really that interesting and there's not all this cool CGI stuff. That would be my take on it. I do like though, especially in the special edition, and maybe it's in the collector's version. I don't think it is though. There are scenes where like there is quite a bit of venom added. There's a scene in a school, especially, which I really appreciate. They go to this Navi school, and there's these bullet holes, and like there's these little tastes where it does feel like it adds a little bit more venom to it, which I enjoy. For me, again, I like what it does with the character, but that beginning, I just would rather get to Pandora. So I think for me, the special edition is the way to go. Um, I will say like one thing though, none of them changed the narrative drastically. None of them are like crazy watches. I would say like I'm not if someone was like, how do I watch Avatar? I've never seen it before. I don't think there's one where I'd be like, this is the clear best way to watch Avatar. I think they're all pretty fine. They have like one or two extra scenes, and then some are extended, obviously, with small changes here and there. I don't think it's necessarily a massive change in the way we've seen with some director's cuts.
Yeah, look, I'll fully 100% believe that this is not like a 3 hour and a half cut of like Kingdom of Heaven. It's not a Ridley Scott director's cut. It doesn't feel like a director's cut that feels that it was taken away from someone. It just feels like this. I wouldn't have an issue with it if it was the theatrical, and then it was the collector's edition. And to answer your point earlier, the everything that's in the special edition, the second cut, is in the collector's edition, but the collector's edition has 8 more minutes onto that. So they sort of get progressively longer, but they all remain the same until you get to the collector's edition, which puts in that opening, which I sort of concur with you slightly that you get put into this world that's like you're watching it and be like, oh, you get the thematic, but you're sort of like, oh wow, like this is Earth. I want to know what bang we're aware. So I can understand that as well, and I also think to you, it feels like it's done, but not complete. I don't know if you felt the same. It might have just been how it was shot. Like foreground, background was like, oh, maybe I don't know. Maybe that was done a lot later. I don't know. The fact that it's not in there, and we sort of worked out why we want to be integrated into Pandora as quick as possible. I'll take that as fact. I wouldn't have anything
Even
to argue with that.
the pacing of that
Schlocky,
scene
isn't
is
it?
weird
Yeah.
when he gets thrown out of the bar and they throw his wheelchair at him, and then all of a sudden the agents walk up. Like I don't know, the
Yes.
entire pacing felt odd to me. The construction felt weird to me. Like I agree with you. It didn't feel like everything that was supposed to be in the beginning. It felt like they kind of changed, like melted it together. I don't know. It just didn't. I don't know.
No, I agree. Also, like you get the point quite early that like Earth's a cesspool, and also the narration is also just like played over it rather than it being on a black screen or cut into where Jitsu is waking up. So it really is sort of like this pacing thing. But I agree with you. Like it's very much on the nose as well. Like he sees a woman in distress and he goes over and he tries to beat him up and like, but for you get the idea that he's going to save that. Was not. He just wants to have a fight. So I think it does add a little bit of like like so maybe he does just want to go there and like cause a little bit of ruckus. But then it's like that wish, like, but then is he like saving the girl? He's like wants to save. So it's, I don't know. I agree with you. Like it asks a little bit more questions than it probably in a confusement rather than be like, oh, I get that from that. I get this from it, and it's very much very on the nose. Earth is not very nice. Yep, we get that. There's nothing much else. The one thing I did think it was interesting is that John Landau, the late John Landau, is just the producer on these, has said that Avatar 4 they'll return to Earth. If that's with a Navi or not, I don't know. And I think it's sort of integral for them to put that in there in order to show that it is going to be something that they'll return to show the dissonance between something so gleamingly clean with life and enrichment, and the other one, this dark, dirty cesspit of like moral deceit. But I agree with you. It very much is like, oh, this is an extended cut. There's nothing much to it. There's just 2 more minutes to it, 3, 4, 5 minutes. The one that really sort of pains me, and I'm so shocked that you. No, I'm not really shocked because you've sort of explained it really perfectly that you want to be transported to Pandora. I suppose that the idea of the special edition, the second cut of it, which is 8 minutes longer, would work because of that. It adds the added texture later on about the characters in Pandora and gets rid of that opening. Maybe I should watch it out of my own moral insights of what I feel about it. However, as much as I appreciate what that does for you as a viewing, and I can completely understand of why that works. Like I said, get rid of the pacing at the beginning. We get transport, but we still get the added richness of texture of heartfelt emotion with Zoe Saldana's sister's character in this, and especially with Grace Sigourney Weaver's character. That to me is just a financial decision of like we need to sort of get it back in 2011. Let's just put it out in theaters. Let's make another some $1 million on it. I feel it's also a cultural thing to bring it back into the idea that they were going to bring Avatar 2 in 2014. So we'll bridge the gap a little bit halfway and we'll get it back into the zeitgeist. But it ultimately feels like a canon decision of, well, we can make a bit more money here. And coming from Fox, that does not shock me whatsoever, especially that a few years earlier they'd made X-Men Origins Wolverine and were just releasing X-Men First Class, constantly going back to the well instead of enriching other characters, things like that. To me, it feels like a financial decision. Whereas the collector's one feels a distinctively different type of palette, while it changes a little few bits. Granted, I think you've got it right. It doesn't change the film, not at all. You can watch any of these three. A, B, and C is the same, but I think you get an an enriched sense of occasion. You get an enriched sense of character motifs. Just a little bit more texture, a bit more feature arc. Let's say character arc, substance. Where we're over style, but I still sort of relegate myself to think that what's the opinion of the re-release aside from financial gain. So it does very much blur it for me. However, with what you've said, the power of discussion, Carson, I sort of like the idea that you've said that might be the best cut because you get straight into it and then you get the power of the sequences itself. But then I ask you this: why do you not think that's then the theatrical cut? Then what changes that so distinctively from the theatrical that they felt that we should add a few more, except for the financial reason, just for you personally? Why do you it's not just the personal level? You can talk about it on a financial level as well. But I just think that then feels like the perfect theatrical cut to me. If that makes any sense?
No, for sure. Not to be nihilistic, I've never viewed any of these cuts as being anything but like a financial thing, to be very clear. I've never looked at any of this and been like, he just had to get this one extra scene on Earth in there. They've all been for financial reasons. The one thing I can think of, I guess there's two. I guess the first is just like trying to cut down time because every film is 2.5 hours. Like at the time, that is ultimately a lot. You're trying to make a lot of money. Every minute cuts down on how many showings you can have in a day. So maybe like just that, but also I think like, and I don't know if this is true at all, but like if you want to remove some of the venom of towards the government, towards that. I don't know if that's anything there where they didn't want to go too hard on it. Granted, that third act and throughout the film, it's definitely pointed. It's not a very casual conversation that you could view the morals either way. So I don't know if that's even possible as a thing, but those are the only two reasons I can think of, and they just wanted it maybe to move. They thought those points were already established elsewhere, but undoubtedly the reason that both came out are purely financial, which, you know
Yeah.
what, valid enough, fair enough, people went to them. But
Yeah, I mean, he cut out 10 minutes of gun violence in the sequel purely for that reason, so that there might be an ethical one. I also think that the first film got the China release. I mean, does that have anything to do with it? I don't know. I'm not too sure if the correlation there makes any sense, but I agree with you. They purely do feel financial, and I also think that to add more to your point, the collector's edition of watching like another 16 minutes is purely to get the Blu-ray release sold as well in international markets. But what's interesting here is that this film, in every market it made, in every domestic, not domestic, but every sort of continent it was released, made 100 million opening in every continent. That's crazy. So Europe, it made 100 million, domestically 100 million. So already it probably gravitated towards its budget and its promotional. Already, so after that, it's just like the honeypot, isn't it? But I still think that when I look at the different versions of this, and again, Cameron's quite, I feel like he's quite brutal with his edits. I think Titanic is one where, you've got a 3 hour film and another 45 minutes of deleted scenes. I don't know if you've got this box set that I do, but regardless of the collector's edition, there's still 45 minutes of deleted scenes. There is actually one subplot that didn't make the cut nor the deleted scenes, is that there is a romance between Michelle Rodriguez and the other team. Is it Joel David Miller or David Joel Miller, something like that?
it's possible.
I,
David
I think,
Joel Moore.
yeah, yeah. So there's actually like never seen romance between them two, and they cut it out, which is like, oh, okay. Like there must be a lot here within, like, he just like directs loads of shit, and he's so it sort of works out that he knows then when to pinpoint. I'll slice that away, slice this away. It's quite it's a very interesting type of like analogy to like a chef. He knows how to dress the plate really well. He knows how much substance to put on there and still have a really interesting, like, engaging plate, and also it being tasty and it being fulfilling. I feel like that type of palette he puts forward into his cinematic quality is one of his most like promising and welcoming returns. But it's interesting, like there's we spoke this about before about the blockbuster, like what do you get rid of, like what do you add, and you look at like the deleted scenes of Star Wars, you think Jesus, like that's like an edit that was clinical to the point of like anything else that I think would have bombed. I haven't been able to send it yet, but we spoke about with Romulus about the work print of Alien, like what was rid of there to make that more empowering, more impactful. You get into Jaws, and we spoke about in length about the Bruce the Shark didn't work, so get rid of it. Add more sort of ominous stuff in the background. It's interesting that everything here that gets rid of is not visual treats. It's actually character work, which I thought was quite interesting. It's all character motif. It's slow, tender reasoning of why this is the situation. That people are like this, and there's a longer sex scene between the two. Not like, I'm not talking about a sex scene, but like this emotional relationship sequence within the middle, which feels like, okay, why would you get rid of that? Because because that feels like detrimental to the. It just feels so clinical to get it off. But there's one clear reason, and having watched the Alien Anthology project by John Landau, which he speaks about Alien 3's length, it's because he needs to get it in as many showings during the day as possible, and 240 allows one extra showing every single day because of the 15-minute mark, aside from being 3 hours. So it's a financial decision, which I think James Cameron does very well, meeting commercial and personal exploit. I think he does a very good job of it. Um, I think as a fan edit, I'd love to go back and like make this complete version of the film of all the deleted scenes and seeing it, really idea of how much it would blossom. But again, and not to go over like old old comments and conversations here, but I do think those three cuts are very interesting.
We've been talking for an hour and 20 minutes now about Avatar 2009. I know we can keep going, but I am going to push us forward because we do have a whole other Avatar film to get through with Avatar The Way of Water. So maybe let's go a minute on the clock for each max. If you want to use less, that's perfect. Final thoughts on 2009's Avatar. I will start. Still not my favorite film of all time, but undeniably a film I really enjoy. And every few years, especially if it was ever on the big screen, I could see myself going and having a great time with it. Works as a blockbuster, works as that roller coaster ride that some look for in cinema. But I do think there are undeniably some creative choices, especially some thematic choices, to give this meaning. It's not revolutionary in its thematics, but I think it is effective. And I think for me, seeing James Cameron go into Avatar, and especially Avatar The Way of Water, it is an ideology in cinema of like this adventurer who wants to try to give this spectacle to people in a way that like I appreciate, I enjoy. I mentioned Titanic. I love that he just took a decade going underwater and he found really cool fish and he was like, that feels really cool. How do I translate that to audiences? And then he created brand new ways of making films to give that experience. That's really endearing to me, even if he's kind of an asshole. So Avatar 2009, I definitely enjoy. I definitely recommend. Jack, final thoughts on Avatar?
I think in 2009, I felt everything looked quite silly, although it was slightly impressive. And I feel like that hasn't really budged a great deal. I still think that the designs look a little bit silly. It's like it's interesting to see the progression of 15 years and like it still holds true. I think visually it's a treat. I think, like you said, I think if you get into a narrative, we're like, oh, we're going over the same conventional archetype characters and narrative arcs here. But I still think on the big screen it looks phenomenal. I think the 178.1 aspect ratio, you're there. There is get a black light or a backlight, sorry. Turn all the lights off. You're in Pandora, and I think that each cut represents how you want to see it as a fan. If you want to be in there and just involve yourself, the theatrical cut. If you want to have be explored into Pandora, but have a little bit more substance, the re-releases are one for you. And I think for diehard fans who want more of this world, I do think the collector's edition is more beneficial. There are changes in all three that are strange. His brother gets shot and killed in the theatrical. That's changed to him dying of a knife in the collector's edition, which is like, okay, I didn't really understand that change. I think there's so much weight with the Sigourney Weaver's character cut out of the theatrical. All very much interesting, strange choices. Why the Avatar logo is green in the collector's edition was like, why is it green when it's like blue or white everywhere else? I didn't understand that. Um, but
No, in
again,
all the versions, the final title is green. It pisses me off. I put it on one of my letterbox
wait,
reviews.
even in theatrical cut.
Yeah, it always cuts in that final
Oh
title
god,
as Avatar in green. And I don't
I,
understand why, because it's not green anywhere else. And even
I'm
Pandora is not green, so it's not even like
yeah.
trees.
I must have blacked out at that point because there was a lot to take in. I was like, so I was sat there, it's like a bottle of wine. But it was really interesting going back, and obviously in the context of the blockbuster, this is fascinating to me. I think it's seamless CGI. I think it looks outstanding. I do think at times it looks like a demo reel. We'll get to that very very shortly. But I just think that as an experience, it very much feels like very canon to me. I'm glad that we've got it. I'm glad that it works. I'm glad it was successful and it proves that original IP can still and proves the point over and over. Again, but like you said, there's misgivings. I think the white savior angle here is like slightly problematic. I don't think there's enough depth. I don't think we actually explore this world very much either. We're just there and we deal it very one note. It's bad guys, good people, black and white, not very blurred. That being said, it is still a very much monumental experience to witness. Watch it as big as you can, watch it as loud as you can. But yeah, it was interesting to watch. Yeah, I like it very much, but it's not. It just isn't to me emotionally engaging. It doesn't have that richness of story. It just feels like, have I seen this before? Yes, I have. Yeah, yes, I have. And I think after that, I just see it as a demo reel. I see it as this pure stimulation, And I think like you said, come back from work and watched it. Perfect environment. Just get transported away. It's the perfect antidote to the hardcore or very much heavy-handed portraits of real life or anything like that. It weirdly feels like something that's very, very difficult to watch behind the surface, on the surface, sorry, because of its themes. But really, in actual fact, I thought it was a breeze to watch. But I would recommend it. I mean, Jesus, for 9 hours I probably wouldn't. But watch the theatrical. Actually, watch the re-release cut that you liked, and I'd say watch the collector's edition just for those who want a bit more. But yeah,
Only spend 6 hours with it, not
yeah,
9. That's the way to.
yeah,
I will say, if you watch all 3 in a week, you can quote some bits, so that's good. You can
yeah.
really learn the film just rapidly. So if you want to watch Avatar, obviously it's available online, Disney Plus especially. In America, it's also on Max. I don't know worldwide. But now let's get to 13 years later. Pretty much immediately, there were talks of Avatar 2. Pretty much immediately, there were ideas going. We heard stories about how production had started, and then it morphed into 5 films that it was going to be. And then Cameron was like, there's ideas for a 6th and 7th, definitely blowing up. But finally, we got The Way of Water. To be clear, this had 8 delays total, which is insane. I mean, again, like over a decade of it being pushed back and being pushed through various parts of production. People were really curious how this was going to play. We're talking post-COVID box office, a film like we mentioned, Avatar as a franchise, didn't necessarily make a huge splash for the decade that followed, but this was pretty big. It was the 11th biggest opening of all time, the 3rd highest opening since the COVID era of films, the 3rd highest grossing film of all time. Very, very popular film. Quite notable that, unlike Avatar, no re-releases. We're not sitting here talking about 5 different versions of the film. We're not talking about they put this in theaters every single year. It kind of just came out and then it ended just like a normal film. Just happened to end with $2.3 billion in the box office, which is pretty damn good. I will start, I guess, because you started with
Please,
Avatar.
please.
Again, I liked Avatar. I was hyped for this. I was excited for this. Even as like a meme, I remember before our Doctor Strange screening, like an hour before, they had a screening for the Avatar Way of Water trailer. And I was like, that is the funniest and stupidest thing I've ever heard of. I'm absolutely going. So I watched that 5 times in theaters, just randomly as a screening. Definitely different than Avatar in a lot of ways. This is definitely film 1. Well, it's weird because it has to be film 2, but also has to be film 1 of setting up this 5-film arc, or this 4-film arc, I guess. And I really like Avatar: The Way of Water. I think, number one, the technicals are outstanding. I mean, obviously there's been an evolution from the first Avatar, which already was technically strong, but this, with the colors, with the life, with the vibrancy, with the texture, it is probably, in my opinion, one of the best, just looking at a visual experience, visual films I've seen. Just the cinematography, the shot composition. There's a scene where everyone is like standing around and there's an eclipse in the background, and it's just gorgeous. The colors of the scenes, the lighting of the scenes. Water is famously something that's really hard to animate and control in CGI, but it's obviously all water. From a story perspective, it does have some interesting, and narrative perspective, it does have some interesting growing pains as it has to translate the story that very much so is not step 1 of a franchise, and turn that world and turn those characters and turn their lives into an arc that's going to set up a franchise. But everything they do character wise, I thought was quite compelling. I like the little hints here they give to what is to come. I do feel like I'm ultimately engaged. I don't think, again, kind of similar to Avatar, I don't think anything here story wise is like shocking or we haven't seen this before. It very much follows some cliches that we've seen. Even going back to like Shakespeare, there's some bits here. These are not narratives that are revolutionary, but it is such a fun ride, such an engaging ride visually, that again, it kind of makes up for it. I guess I know I'm kind of repeating some of it with Avatar, but like, I do think this one has stronger characters, has stronger narratives, but so much of that comes from the world being so exciting. And I love that we're going to continue to explore this world. I'm very positive. It's kind of hard. Like, before, when I first watched both of them, I was like, Avatar is definitely ahead of, for me, than Way of Water. I'm starting to think maybe like Way of Water a little bit better. I don't know. On rewatches, I think this one holds up with a little bit more to chew on. Some interesting choices as far as bringing back everyone, including characters that died, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But I definitely appreciate this film. But Jack, I know on a first viewing, at least, I'm kind of scared for this one because I know on a first viewing you were quite harsh on this. I don't know if you're going to be again, but I would love to hear your thoughts on Avatar: The Way of Water.
So I think you can probably find this on ClapperCast, maybe through like its first iteration where we were going to talk about during the COVID releases and stuff like that. And I remember saying this came up a few times, Way of the Water, and I think I've been at both sides of the river here. Where one, I'm like, I just don't see it making a lot of money as it is. I think the gap is too astronomical. And then the latter half of me was like, well, after COVID, it may be the big one where it would just bring people back to the theatre. And I think if you've got to have your cake and eat it at that point, I think I would probably be able to swallow that. That being said, and again, to reiterate what I said about Avatar, I find this whole franchise to be as engaging as visually. I don't find any excess a motive or engagement with the material. So after 2009, to me, this was one and done. I think it actually works more beneficial as one and done as well, in the fact that it as a seismic, again, I love to use that word today, but as this monumental experience and this genuine stab within the canon of like original IP. It really sort of came out of nowhere, within a reason, of course, within its 5 year creation. Let's say it wasn't like this long gesturing project that was like it took 20 years to make or like that. I know that it blossomed since 1994, but again, whatever that is to James Cameron's up to him. But for me, after 2009, this relationship with me and Avatar was sort of like done. I think for a lot of people it was, and I think again that re-release in 2011 did nothing for me anyway. I don't think I ever wanted to see it. So again, there was no sort of emphasis of me wanting to watch anything like this. And then 2014, I think he said something like, "We're not going to go into production. We're going to pause it here because I want to write the 4 sequels and we want to get the arc crafted." And at the time, I'm like, how egotistical. Just do the second one and plan them out. What makes you think you're going to get 4 of these done and them all be successful? Is either your ego or your pride getting in the way? Granted, they're being proven wrong there, but we'll get to that later. But I also think that to the other side of that, having watched the sequel trilogy of Star Wars commence, I mean, major planning is perhaps one of the things they should have done. So I'm at like loggerheads with that as well. Nevertheless, so 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, all these things come about like, oh, we're pausing it. We want to do 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then I like you said, 6 and 7, which I just think is ludicrous. He'll be 89 when the eighth one comes out. It's just stupid. It's just silly. It's just a man talking about pure ego at this point. And I think that I mentioned this in the True Lies stuff, Titanic, and now this. I've got an issue with James Cameron, which I'll get onto slightly later, but I just think it's just this egotistical thing where because he said after the success of this that he was going to end this after 2 with 3, and that was it as a trilogy if this didn't make the billion, which I think is so fucking ludicrously egotistical. I mean, fair play because he's got a criteria to back all those statements up. But for me, that what we could have had instead to push the boundary and to do anything you wanted to do these, I just think it's detrimental to audiences and to him as a filmmaker. But I actively didn't want to watch this in the cinema, which is going to sound silly, but to me, I'm not. I don't. I just want nothing to do with this. For the longest time, I just didn't. I want nothing to do with this franchise. I can't be as sincere as I am and not sound like someone who's being silly because I love the form of film. I mean, I know we joke about. We talk about open mats, alternate cuts. I love everything. I love 16 mil, 35, 65 mil. I'm there. Trust me, I love cinema. But there's something about watching a filmmaker crawl up his own arse where I find it somewhat just repelling. And to me, to do 15 years after and try and bring everyone back, I'm like, oh, that's cool. But I would expect something so much more from a creative like James Cameron. That being said, I actively didn't want to watch this, and I think I was working away at the time. And I think there was an opportunity for us to go watch it, and I was like, "Fuck it!" So I went with a few people, and it perhaps would might have been an experience for me be going predisposed, but I didn't particularly find anything fun in this, and I felt that everything that I felt about the original was intensified or exacerbated, and I think that's how I ultimately feel about this. Everything I liked about Avatar, its visual sense, I think look even better. As the more positives of Avatar, they're even more positive. But the detriments that the Avatar had, I feel that they're even increased here to an even worse extent. So it's interesting because what you try. Carson's been very kind, but I give this a 2 out of 5 star. To me it just didn't work. I think this is the quintessential demo reel. It's even worse than Avatar in a sense that this is built purposely for the 4D experience or the 3D experience. But once that leaves the cinema for his own financial and 20th Century Fox's or Disney's financial gain, where does that leave the audience? And for me, when you watch it at home, it is a visual delight. There is nothing for me here after that. And I think it's one of those things where it even tests my patience. At 3 hours and 12 minutes, and like you said, I think you were joking about, we're not here for an extended cut, we're not here for thank God. Thank God, because for 3 hours 12, I think I read a lot of reviews to try and just to see if I wasn't being pedantic, and I know people be like, well, you are, but there's a lot of people who regulate this to like, there's an hour of filler here, and I have to say there is. I was an hour and 15 minutes into this, and I was like, I've only got an hour left. That's not too bad. I was like, no, there's 2 hours left. 2 hours and 50. I was like, Jesus, really? It does not hold its weight in narrative. I'll tell that. And I'll say this: the issue that this has is caused by its own self worth, and another just to explain that, and it's that 15-year time gap. It has to reinvent itself by being Uno again, but it also then has to be a sequel, and I think it does not suffice under its own weight, because the first 20 minutes of this are essentially a prologue, which is like chapter 1.5, and I think that should have been the film. That should have been the film where they have the child. He fully integrates. He's the chief, or whatever is going to happen. But they come back, and I think that's the idea of like them having to fight. But you get the same film then. So again, on a principal lens of just narrative, in any direction this would have worked. It would not have worked for me. If it stays back where they were when the ship first comes down and it blows everything away, and we get to see them build that city. At least let's see that over time. The 1 year later really pissed me off, and I know this is going to go on a bit slight rant, so I'm gonna just rein it in slightly. But everything that happened in this film narratively just felt like something that was aimed directly at me. That I was like, oh, this is the issue here. That's why. The fact that it has to go 1 year later and pushes somewhere else, to me, is just a sake of, well, we have to push the narrative along to get to it to be, because we have to push them to a new world. Sorry, not a new world, but a new tribe. And then all it adds is just texture for the world itself. It doesn't add anything into the narrative. It doesn't add anything into the formula of progression. Granted, aside from the CGI using working underwater technique, which I think is again a staple now of its craft, I cannot in any way come down on that. I think this is another canon entry for cinema. It's another technological advancement. But again, like you said about the first Avatar, I come back to that. I'm like, well, what else are we going here with these characters? What is the excuse to go back? And to me, I have to say, after watching when it came out and watching it now, I don't feel there's a reason to go back, Carson. I know that sounds really morbid and like, oh my god, you pessimistic bitch. But I do feel like, honestly, I just feel like, why am I going back here? Why are we going back? And I don't think this as a narrative suffices as answering that question. The 15-20 minute prologue is where like we start to do something. We cut a year forward. Is that what I mean? For what other reason? Why are we having an immaculate birth here? What the questions will be answered. It's just a technique that Star Wars did. It just rubs me the wrong way in the fact that we're going to have to find out years later, and it won't mean anything. To me, it just all feels like a very much very expensive demo reel of inventing a new Venice camera, which looks superb. Everything looks amazing here. It looks utterly. You could become delirious after watching the imagery here. I think the editing in the final is quite genuinely breathtaking as well. I think that how the scene blocking is outstanding, truly magnificent of a director who's like, it's all been previs. The guy's had it in his mind for 15 years. You can tell. But I just think narratively, what are we here for except for watching a family run around causing even more mayhem? I mean, why do they have to leave? Because they just get found anyway. They just put another tribe into a predicament where they're going to get killed. To me, I think there's major issues narratively here, major issues. But I don't want to, you know, I don't want to come across like incredibly negative. So I'm open to have a debate here with it. But I just don't think it self suffices. I honestly, after two showings, I think it gets worse.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much of a debate we're gonna have here because, like, we both, I think, come from different perspectives. But I think, like, your takes are incredibly valid. I think it just depends how interested you are in the character work they set up and the story of, oh God, what's his name? The kid and the father. Yeah, how interested you are in the brother relationship and the
You
whale
may have answered
drama.
my question there. You may have answered my thing there, but go on.
um, I think that, like, it just depends how interested you are in that. I was intrigued by those. I like seeing where they're going to pay off. I also like the action in this. I think towards the end, it
Oh,
is definitely a
terrific!
little
Yeah,
bit masturbatory, but like it does keep going, and then it keeps going in a way that I appreciate as a spectacle. But I just think for me, I don't mind. Well, the first 30 minutes, let's say first 45, maybe just say first hour, is definitely rough. There's definitely growing pains here. Once you get to the actual world, the like water bit, I love that we just slow down, we spend time with these characters. I maybe
Oh
it's just like
wow!
my TikTok brain. I am fine that we spend 30 minutes just like underwater swimming around with animals. I think on our we did our like year wrap up episode and we were listing our favorite scenes, and I was like the second hour of After the Way Water because I enjoy that. I'm fine with that. I think it just depends how interested you are. If you're looking for a cleaner engagement, but like, or a cleaner narrative and a more let's get to it, let's get to some thematic purpose, I can see being frustrated. I guess for me, I was just more open to giving it time for character work and time for exploring this world and setting up this world, because I am really like viewing this as episode one of, let's say, a 5 episode series. So I need time to understand these characters and care about these characters and buy into their arcs. I like the fact that there are moves also, like some people die. I like that there are stakes to this. I think it sets up things. And I guess maybe that's like, we will all see where this franchise goes. I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt undoubtedly here. It's not like, like, I think we were to review Force Awakens opening day. Our thoughts on how that new trilogy looks is going to be very different from how it ends with Rise of Skywalker and how we view it.
Indeed.
So I am viewing it forward as if like all these emotional beats that are set up here, somewhat rudimentary,
Mhm.
but are set up. I think they're going to have a strong enough emotional payoff down the line to where this is engaging. If it ends, we get to movie 8 in 30 years, and it's a weak fart of an end as these moments don't pay off, then I think undoubtedly The Way of Water is going to retroactively become far less engaging, far less worthwhile. But it's Spider, his name is Spider. I'm excited to see what happens with Spider. I'm excited to see
We'll get
what
there.
happens with Nick Scully. Um, I will say maybe I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt, but I have faith that these are going to pay off in a way. But I guess maybe I feel like James Cameron has to have a vision if he's going to do 8 of these. Maybe I'm wrong. But
Oh
I
no.
guess maybe
I
I'm just
look.
giving it the benefit of the doubt.
No, look. I think you're right. I think if someone who's going to put 4 years of the time, well, 4 films, 10, 15 years of his time, another 15 years, 30 years of a cinematic career into a franchise, obviously has some sort of identity and warmth to this creation, and I have no issue with that. And equally as much, I don't have necessarily an issue with anything that's brought up here that's going to be paid off soon. I like Horizon, champion for the Kevin Costner, and even the Force Awakens. I think those things you can, as a chapter one in a lot of cases, you can essentially put them in your back burner and be like, consciously, I can take it what it is, but eventually we'll need those answered. Like you said, I'll give the benefit of the doubt there. I don't necessarily have any issue with that. The biggest concern there is just the Deus Ex Machina type of writing of, well, Sigourney Weaver's back and she's got a child now. Like what? Like it's just stuff like that where it's to create a character here that adds weight in these scenarios that you'll get an idea of why that's a thing later on, which again will contextually sort of put a spin on why that is the case. But it doesn't really. It sort of just works really as a caricature in this, in that I need that character there to have a warmth and get that character to save these people, and I'll later on write that in. To me, that's lazy. Whatever, like that, will go for tomato there, and I think that's a vast amount of audiences. I think people will give and take there for me. I think that takes quite a lot. I'm not giving anything to that. The issues I have here are more so that it's been 15 years and we just drop into a prologue like it's been like, oh, you remember these people? Either don't start with these ever. The Avatar world is the Star Wars issue, is that we're in a galaxy with where we're looking at a family. Like we don't need to look at something so vast and look at a sector of ants. It's massive here. We don't have to stay with that family. Why didn't we stay with the water tribe and have it absorbed there? And we can experience that for the hour that comes before it. Have it just there. It would be less detrimental to the experience, because all that is going to go back into this family. And then when we go to 3, let's go somewhere else. Let's see a story about the company against Pandora. I don't think we need to see Jake Sully's character. It's done. And I go back to this, and we start with the prologue, and we see this star in the sky, and it's these, like, they bring all 10 ships aside from one, like they did in the first one. So you get the Might, you get the James Cameron thing. It comes down in a blaze of fire, and it destructs and takes over. And I'm sat there thinking, like, oh wow, like, the iconography is impressive, and it's just 1 year later. And I'm just sat there thinking, like, you know, it just feels like a detriment of the experience, in that we're going to have to push forward here, and we're going to cut out so much of the actual idea, but we're going to go through the same thing that you brought with the first film. To me, that's just very poor writing. I know that sounds silly, because there's been 4 blocks of this, it's been batched, but I still think that's just poor idea of having to add that in because you've been 15 years. Just get rid of the Sullys. Let them play different characters. I'm not bothered. I just think that the whole idea of having to bring them in actually brings a detriment to the whole experience, because it's interesting that you said the first hour's rough. I disagree. I think the first hour is fine for me, slightly, because you get to sort of experience that we're going to a new place. It's the hour in between that kills me, because I'm watching children argue with other children in a world that we've already set the tonal precedent of, is that we're watching genocide. And if the idea is to show the context, or this correlation between innocence, excuse me, and vulnerability and evil, then that's fair enough. But we just spend a family dynamic with another family dynamic, and one of them is insufferable to watch, which is a spider thing, which we'll get onto later. And the other one is just kids arguing with each other about where they should be in the world, and it's just, to me, I just think it's a wasted opportunity to truly explore this paradise, and to explore the corners of this world, and be dragged into one set of a family that I don't care about, because I haven't watched these kids grow. I don't care about them. I don't care that the kid dies, or, like, which sounds horrific to say, but I'm sat there thinking, like, he's gonna have to have an emotional pull here. So one of them's gonna have to bite the bullet. To me, it just becomes a predictable sort of eyesore. But it's all done on the backbone of this beautiful portrait of, like, a dog licking its own ass, if that makes sense. Like, it's like, look, you're watching something so beautifully painted, and the actual final result is something very much like, oh god, I don't know. Let's spend $600 million of making a new sign that's just a Nike tick again. It just feels like there's a lot put into it, and there's just not very much put out. And again, that comes into the idea of, like, the corporate entity of this as well. What risks does this take narratively? Excuse me. I just don't see why the experience of 15 years, I'm being brought back here. Why am I being brought back to a family that came full circle? He found his home, and now I'm watching them ruin someone else. It's never spoke about, and because of their own ego, and they bring the kids along, and you just know something bad's going to happen. I'm watching this immaculate Sigourney Weaver playing an 8-year-old. I'm like, that's weird, but I can get with it. But like, but it's like it's like a 75-year-old woman talking, and it's like, right. There's just creative choices in here that I think are a bit, not even big swings, just very strange choices. I'm losing my voice, sorry, because I've been crying in the other room, screaming to a pillow. I had to do about Way of the Water. But every time I watch it, just as the issues become exacerbated for me. But I have to say, though, just to mute the point, though, I do think it's absolutely breathtaking. I think some of the underwater work with the whale, I think, is absolutely gorgeous, to a point where I'm just blurring the line between Uncanny Valley here. Like, you got stuff in Alien, Romulus, and Rogue One, and I look at this, Carson, I'm like, oh my god, like, oh my god, like, this is the water work here, the use of color, the texture, it's utterly breathtaking. But it convinces me once again that if I take away from the visuals and I'm looking at the substance, I think there's less here to come back in return for Avatar. And I do think it's just that tech demo that we're watching, a demo reel of what someone's created. I just it's hard because I don't want to come in here and sound like really negative, and I do want to have a conversation, and I don't want anyone to think that because I don't like this doesn't bring the film down in their eyes. Don't listen to me. It's just I've just got a voice and I've got an opinion, but I just think for 15 years that's a monumental thing. We talk about legacy sequels and the blockbusters, infamous for that now. You know, we've got Jurassic World, and you ask the question, why are we going back to that place? And it's just for corporate greed for Universal. Why are we going back to Star Wars? It's done. You know, why are we following the Skywalker saga? Why can't we do new things? And you know, we look at the Jaws sequels, and it seems to happen all the time where, you know, I think this is the one opportunity I do think where it could have broke away from that chapter, and maybe that the Sully family go missing, but they haven't seen Jake Sully in 10 years. We don't know why. Maybe that could be such an interesting story to say that myth, the myth of a human who became a Na'vi, like that's so interesting to have in the background, like the myth culture within the own universe, but to follow just the family on the water to me would be so much more absorbent and engaging. And then maybe down the line we find that Jake Sully's become like, I don't know, like a major fixture as a rebel. Like he's become the military factor he once always was going to be, but he's just as a Na'vi. The one thing I will say, just to be very positive before I hand it back over to you, is I quite like the connection and the opposing factor of Stephen Lang and Sam Worthington's character now. I like that Sam Worthington's having to follow a group of people back into battle, and he's now the leader of this. Where you've got Stephen Lang, who's having to find like a family member or like fall to some endearment with a family member who's learning to become one of them. I think that's an interesting opposing arc. That said, I don't find Stephen Lang opposing in this. I think there's a lot of environmental stuff that's quite strong in here. Why is Jermaine Clement in here? Like, it just takes me away. There's a lot of creative choices here where I'm like, I don't know. Maybe it's just been a very long Avatar day for me, Carson. But watching this two years after release, it just I don't know. It tires me out. I wish we'd have had more, you know. But please take me out of my misery. Give me some positives. Come on.
Well, I don't know if any of my points are going to sell you on it. I will say, like, number one, Sigourney Weaver is undoubtedly, I think, one of the weakest parts of this film. She's also putting on like a weird accent. It's very odd. The spider performance in that I didn't also like. The acting, I would say, in this overall is much more inconsistent than the first film. I don't know, like some of your points are like you mentioned that, well, a few things. I think you couldn't really take any other angle than the Sully family, to be honest, because like we've seen the corporation versus the Na'vi. We've seen the company versus the Na'vi. We've done that narrative. I don't know what is really there for a whole 3-hour production, 2.5 hour production, whatever you want to say. That is so original and new that it would be captivating. I think the only way to do this is to deep dive and flesh out character relationships, character emotions, which is what I think they do here. They increase the family dynamic. They increase the, I don't know, Shakespearean drama, if you want to call it, between characters, the inner character relationships. They play into the history with him finding his skull and crushing it, and then the son, like that is all here. I think that's the only way you can expand, whether or not, I mean, I think might reach a point where we just say Avatar maybe shouldn't get a bunch of sequels. Maybe this world and these characters were not set up for this and are not equipped for this job. But yeah, I think that's really the only way it could go. And I don't mind that it did. You also mentioned that, like, what is new here? What is really inventive? What is like the narrative point? That's kind of Avatar, though. Like, the first Avatar didn't have this great narrative. We just talked about this. Like, for me, like, I guess it just comes down to what do you expect and what are your expectations. For me, I expected this to be part one of a franchise. I didn't expect this to be revolutionary, and it's not revolutionary. It's delivering something that's very average, when it comes to emotions and narratives, and just excelling it with its technical points, very similar to what Avatar did. And like there are emotional beats though, where like the son dies and then they go into Awa or dream whatever, and they see him, and like that's a good emotional moment, right? That's emotionally hitting for me. I will say the logic of them, especially at the end, with their relationship with the water tribe is very unclear to me. That's the one point where I'm like, especially because the ending point is like, we need to fight and stay. We need to stay in our home and fight. And it's like, well, then why don't you go back home? Why are you still here?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where the conflict is going from here. I will say to space this out to, let's say, 5 films, because 7 and 8 are just kind of
Oh
ideas right
yeah.
now. It does feel like probably the third one should be the wrap up from what I'm seeing with this narrative. We'll see obviously what happens, but I don't think you're wrong in what you're saying. I guess this maybe is just like a point of expectations from both seeing the original Avatar and understanding what this is as far as being a modern blockbuster, trying to create a modern franchise. I'm not shocked by those negatives here, so I guess they don't really affect me in the same way they affect you. I also am bought in more on the visuals and these characters, and like maybe I'm just more open minded towards it. But I think for me, I see your issues. I'm not denying them. I don't think you have it pegged wrong here per se. I think it's just like, I don't know what else you would have done. I don't, and like even you mentioned like, what if Jake Sully went away? We're just doing Last Jedi then with Luke Skywalker. I agree, like there's something there. I'm curious what framing they do, but like I didn't see any world where Avatar was going to be this like shocking franchise where it goes in all these directions that I had no idea it's inspired.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I'm just happy this isn't Ghostbusters Frozen Empire to a point. Like I do think this is very watchable. I think this for
Yeah, me.
me, I'm here for it. But I understand also why you wouldn't be if you're expecting this. I also just want to say though, I think the whole bringing up the 13 years is a little unfair because so much of that is technical.
No,
So
fair
much of
enough.
that
Yeah.
is, and they filmed this like way long ago. This is not like shot in
Mm-hmm.
2019. They were filming elements of this back in like the mid 2010s. So like I do think to some degree you have to be a little bit kind on like the weight of what that years means, because so much of that is technical and the technical
Yeah,
stuff
of
worked out for
course.
them.
Yeah. I just,
Yeah.
I would just say, I think with narrative, like when I'm talking about evolution, let's say evolutionary arcs here, that if I agree to your point and to the masses of like we have to stay with the Sullies, that's fair enough. But I feel like when I'm watching this, I feel like we're watching a retread of the first film, although we're changing the paint, and I just think that the arc with having bringing back Stephen Lang is an interesting one that adds texture to the company that no one really dies. That evil's always going to persist. That's all. That's fine just as a thematic, but in context of the film, we're watching essentially the same thing happen again. I just feel like for such a tale and such a vast scope of this franchise has in its own it's an absurd way to then go and essentially fall back on the same arc steps. I just feel like it's slightly more. I just become more despondent to it. I will say this as well. Um, the whole spider thing is like again to me it just reiterates the surface level of this. Like with the actual visual sense of that those things coming down in the opening. It's all like surface, but the fact that the spider has been who's been saved by these Navi, who has found an emotional bond with them, which is ultimately like their stepchild in a way, very much like Sigourney Weaver's character is, which I still think we're never going to get like what is that. But the fact that like he then somehow within the stage of what comes like in weeks, essentially what is months, excuse me, becomes indoctrinated to Stephen Lang's character and saves him. He's just like, what? Have you not just seen that he shot your brother? Like he's taken his sisters captive, he's taken you captive, and then somehow you feel that you're gonna turn a little bit and give him a reprisal of like faith. I just think it's slightly silly. The only thing that I think when you said about having a bit of hope and faith with that arc is that you can see through this in the fact that in the third and fourth one, the company is going to turn on him because he's not human anymore. And he's going to have to he's got to find his own sense like Jake Sully did, and that he's going to have to find that he to live on Pandora. That's the world he's going to have to live on. Humanity now, Earth's not. Once his job is done, he has nothing to go. He's going to be cut ties. So I can understand there's going to be a longevity of what he's going to have to find after the fact. How they do that, I don't know. Or what the consequence, sorry, is that it's obvious how they're going to do it. But the whole spider thing, it's all just surface. like, oh, we've got to have him have a little bit of an empathy because we can't have him killing him or him leaving him. Like, to me, I just sat there and just like, you've got to take risks. And I know Cameron's said about like he doesn't like to see characters just turn at the end. He doesn't just want big turns. You've got to see a progression. I just don't see any progression here either. And again, the spider thing is just like very much surface one note. Like, oh, like we got to add so many more little bits of texture here. And what does it add? Well, they
I don't
saved the
know.
human.
When a Tiri is about to cut him, that's like something, right? I think it's a slow build. I feel very
So what?
confident that in probably Avatar like 3 or 4, Spider is gonna kill Jake Sully. I'll be honest. Like I think that's where this is going. Like
Oh yeah,
I don't know,
yeah.
it's not a shocking arc, but I think
No,
it's there.
I won't say it's shocking. I just think it's underwhelming for me. I think it writes
Sure,
itself, and it goes back to the point I made about Avatar, and especially with Titanic. In the narrative now, it's such just no consequence. It'll write itself. He'll use the archetype and convention because that's what audiences are preordained to expect, and I don't think he's
for
going to
sure.
subvert that. And I think it goes back to what you said. The Shakespearean thing comes in here because those arcs are written as pieces of material that work in an array of genre. He'll just use that as existing arcs of A, B, and C, and he'll put his little bit of texture and paint on these little bits and pieces, and then that's how we get a narrative. But above that, seeing through that principle and seeing through the one note aspect of it all, I'm just left with I can see where this is all going. So what am I working with here? And it's just a feature that I feel that is so grandiose and is so gargantuan, and it's one of those things where it's just this monumental thing, and I'm just stagnating watching children argue. And granted, I think it needs that texture in slight places for the end of it, but again, maybe it comes back to the expectation, but I just see it as something that very much vastly underwhelms me, and it shouldn't be that
Sure.
thing. It should, and I think I've got to be honest, and I'll probably eat my words here, but I also think that it's be a major detriment for 3 and 4 in the fact that there's nothing here that has blown anyone away. The fact that it made loads of money, I do think is a side issue of COVID. I think season 3 will be some season 3. Excuse me. I hope that's God. Let's hope there's not 10 hours of this. Let's hope that season. I said it again. Let's hope. Let's hope. I've got Navi on the mind. Let's just hope that the entry of the third film, if there's an issue there with how much it makes, which I think there will be, because I think people would have
Agreed.
expected. And granted, the 15-year thing is not a detriment of its technological advancement. I just think after waiting so long to want to be opened up to this world and to be stuck in one place essentially, it does feel like the Last Jedi in a way that I'm glad you brought that up and not me. But we're watching Star Wars and we're stuck in space and for 2.5 hours and we don't go anywhere and we don't explore. And I just think it's one of those things where you have this major arc and this major world, and I just don't think we evolve narratively. And again,
Sure.
what is left is technological advancement. And for me, I'm not just someone who purely goes on stimulation. Like I think a lot of Star Wars, Marvel, Disney stuff has become essentially.
I will say the one good thing this has is like going for it is that every entry can have a completely new iconography as it slowly explores the world, and like I think that's going to help with drawing people in. But undeniably, the reception to Way of Water was mixed, to say the best, to say the
Yes,
nicest
yeah.
way. Like a lot of people did not like this film and were underwhelmed by it. I do think we're going to continually have issues with. Slowly, we're going to see lower and lower box offices, certainly lower and lower reception to it. I'm
Mhm.
curious how, as a franchise, because it's all, we've seen obviously where MCU went, we've seen where DC went, we saw where the Dark Universe died immediately. I am curious how this franchise handles it, because a lot of the time when that happens, it's either like they double down on it and they try to recapture their glory, or they swerve into a new direction. I'm curious how it handles that, because I really don't know how that's going to happen. Um, but I definitely am interested in what happens next. I know the visual
Good.
art looked really cool. I know me and Nick will be there for Avatar Fire and
Look,
Ash or whatever
yeah,
it is.
you two in an empty theater, but no, I'm joking. I think its sequel will make money. I think it'll reach its 600 700, but there will be a drop off in the fact that in any sequel, there's one group of people who want the same thing, and there's another group who want a complete different experience within the same world, and there's a third group who want both of the bits of the two. This is going for the third group and sort of annexing the first two, and it proved its point. That being said, where does this go now? Again, we're probably jumping the gun slightly here, but where does this go in a sense of the technological advancement? These have been shot. This has been shot. The third one already. They've shot 2/3 of the fourth one now, and then I think he's not going to shoot any more until this one comes out, which to me is a sign of that if this doesn't make money, he's going to wrap the fucker up after the fourth, which is a great inclination of why he would do that. Otherwise, if he was so surefire about his projects, he'd just go and shoot on in like Costner's doing. I don't care about the reception of one. I'm doing my vision. The fact that he's stopped doing that and wants to see the end product of three and how people view that to me is twofold. Like I said, that he wants to see if it's going to make money to end it, or he's going to narratively do something a bit strange with the cliffhanger. Because he said, I think he was on record, that this one would not end on a cliffhanger because I don't think he could afford it to have the weight. It had to feel like a 1 and a 2. I think this chapter 3 is going to feel distinctively different in that I think he's going to take us to see, I think he's on record to have said this, excuse me, a villainous Navi tribe to see a bad side of the Navi and perhaps the good side of the humans, which would be interesting. That's a thematic difference. That's it that engages me. That'll be the question to the answers that I've wanted with this, and perhaps the first part in Avatar. But it'd be interesting how he sees the technological advancement of the third, because I would have to say that was the main issue of why people wanted to go watch one. As you said, the 3D pre-sales. The second one is probably an idea of how they can do it. There was nothing else like it. What have people got to resonate with in the third film? Narratively, they're going to be slightly mixed because where do we go? They have no idea about this world, so that'd be a shock no matter what. But technological wise, I can't see that being the pull anymore. So I think that's going to be an answer to your statement about it dwelling slightly. But I'll go watch it. I find no emotional engagement with it. But that being said, like you can't really doubt James Cameron anymore. It feels like it would be silly to do that. But I would put a bet. I think it'll make $700 million worldwide. I don't think it'll crack the billion. And if it does, I'll be wrong, let's say. But I just think that 15 years is a long time to wait and to see a product be delivered, and to me to be so not redundant, but to be so one note and not necessarily not even predictable, but in a sense of like, oh, this is not really anything new here. And I think a lot of audiences do that. But I was slightly shocked what you said about the reviews, because I read that as well. Robbie Collins of the Telegraph hated it. Peter Bradshaw from The Gang hated it, 1 star. And I wouldn't go that bad. I think there's some redeeming qualities in here. But I think if I look at James Cameron's career and I see there's just advancements technical wise, and there's advancements in having creative products, I have to think that this is like the one where I'm like, it's the abyss to me. It's cool, but there's like an arc there that's interesting but never engaging. And ironically, they both have to do with this visualization of underwater photography, and it's just the same shit with the abyss to me. I don't know if you've seen the abyss, have you?
I have not. It's the last James Cameron.
I would find it fascinating for your opinion on that after this, because of how much you adore this. I'd love to know your the abyss and to watch the 2 cuts of it. Because it's so fucking similar into this to me, where it's like the theatrical is like okay, and the director's cut is like okay. Like visually, it's a treat, but thematically, like we're going for 3/4 of a film, and then we have like what? Excuse me. And this is a similar sense, but I don't know where to go with that.
It's on my watch list for sure. I was gonna watch it before this. Genuinely, that was on my plan, and then I watched 12 hours of Avatar and didn't get a chance to. So
that will do it.
I'm interested in doing.
That will do it.
I would because I think we're like on the verge of defining this, and I'm curious, and I could answer this question to a point, but I'm curious your definition on this, because I can already hear people saying, like, in this conversation, another blockbuster that came out recently that we both really love and a lot of people really love is Top Gun Maverick. Top Gun Maverick follows a lot of the same. Added to the bingo card, we're talking about blockbusters, so we're talking about Top Gun Maverick. follows a lot of the similar narrative beats that we've seen before. It's not necessarily presenting narratively something incredibly new for the genre. But that's a film we both really love. That's a film you really love. What would you say is the difference between I guess, Top Gun Maverick and Avatar The Way of Water when it comes to your reception towards them? Again, kind of, yeah.
Wow. There's a lot. The first one is that you've got a star that you want with Tom Cruise that you want to watch. You want to see who has actively progressed the technological advancement in a sense of the creative process on a film with Mission Impossible, and now how they shoot with Joseph Kosinski who did Tron. So there's going to be the technical thing there that's not too out of reach to be not in reality, but keep with us within the world, which again within the fighter jets is. There's only so much you can do, but it's still engaging. I think the sense of watching a character go back to something, to a cult favorite of Tony Scott's, was also quite compelling. But I think the reason of where the two are interesting and similar is that what are we going back for, and what is it going to be interesting? Are we watching the same thing again? And I think you could argue that Top Gun does retread thematic, tonal, narrative stuff, but it feels like there's a substance enough there to watch someone make bread and come to terms with the sins of the past, and to feel that um, I've got to teach these people this thing because I can't have another conscience. I can't have a death on my conscience. And the fact that this person's son's in here who is risking his life, who doesn't understand the moral ambiguity I've got, and also the moral issue of his father dying on my watch. I think there's a lot of substance there that feels real. I think it's palatable. It has a texture that's a unique reality into it. Um, and I also think it's just dumb fun. Whereas I think when I look at Avatar, I find that it's quite gross in a sense of we're watching blue aliens fight in a world that isn't real about things that are very much like human. And I think there's sort of this dissonance there in a sense, although those arcs are human to begin with, so there's an immersion there. But I just think that we're going back to that world, and what's Jake Sully going through? He's just fighting for his family that he did in the first film. I just think there's when we go back. I mean, it's also legacy sequels as well. But I think going back and watching this a really rich thematic of a narrative about someone who's, if you fuck up, that boy's gonna die, and the father's injury is grave injuries on your shoulders, and you constantly try to withdraw and make sure that this boy or this young man doesn't make the same choice, but that's just spurred him on more. There's a titan coming together there where they're both gonna come at loggerheads, and one's at the end of the career, one's at the beginning of the career. They need to find peace. I think it's just to me, it's just a morally more interesting film that's not ambiguous. It's engaging, and it's really rich. Whereas I want to look at this, the framework is eerily similar, but I just don't find it ever so compelling. I think it's like Stephen Lang's now a Navi, isn't that interesting? Let's move on. Like spiders, like his father. Let's move on. You know, we're adopting these kids. We're going. Let's move on. There just seems to be this idea where it wants to propose these themes, but never actually feel like I identify them or be engrossed in that nature. And the time it does spend with the character wants to get ethereal, as my wife would say, is that we have no idea. She's an immaculate birth. We've got no idea what the fuck is going on. She's with like Enya or Enwa or whatever it is. She's with the one with Earth. It very much is a get out of jail free card to take us away from here and there. So I hope, I know that's a bit slightly of a bit of a ramble, but I think that to put it very very bluntly, Top Gun Maverick proposes themes and actually gets very dicey with it and engages with that. You know, the whole thing about him and Iceman about going head to head and loggerheads, and I know at the end of the day coming back together, but he's dead. He dies. Spoiler is like a horrible consequence of ego, of masculine ego, and the same thing is happening now with what is also almost his adopted son. There feels like a real world terror if that just humanity going by and letting ego and humanistic impulse and things that human people have to get in the way of love and affection and hope. Whereas when I watch Avatar, those things are all there, but they doesn't want to ever engage with that. You know, the fact that Zoe Saldana cuts that young boy's chest, and it's like there's no consequence to that. Like that's her adopted child who she doesn't has a really horrible relationship, but she's willing to cut that little kid's head off. Like, but are we not going to talk about that? Like she kills one of the guys on the ship, and Spider's watching her, and the film actually cuts away in a deleted scene where she actually kills him, and the blood goes in her face, and you can see it when she turns away. There's like blood on her face. It cuts away from that. He wants to cut away from the actuality of the sequence and what that will say about how that arc then is processed. How do we feel about that? How do we feel that this person, this mother who's lost their son, is now in such in a blood drunk and thirsty for revenge? How are we processing that? And the film's just not engaged with it, not interested in it. So that's I know that's a long rambling, and I do apologize, but I just think um, they are two very different films. But I just think in a long run, Avatar does not want to engage with its own themes to a degree where you know. And it's same to the Last Jedi. I know I'm going on here, but I don't. I'm sorry. I hate doing this. I feel like I take over, and please, like, please don't feel like I'm fucking just going on and on. But I just feel like the Last Jedi is the same way in that we're proposing themes about masculinity, and about religion, and about ego, and we're not wanting to engage with that because they need to rush through a narrative. And this is like just exactly the same. We need to get bums on seats, character, ambivalence character. Yeah, they're all like that, and we'll get them in the middle and have a fight at the end. It just feels maybe a form of where we're at now. I feel like I don't know. I don't. I just feel like I'm rambling. But what's your opinion?
No, I like that. I'm going to remove Last Jedi from the conversation with what I'm going to bring up because there's a corporate side of that kind of
Of
limits the
course, yeah.
creative process and stuff. So I'm going to put that to the side. We're also missing an Avatar, in my opinion, an emotional care by the people making it. Everything you said is right, but I also, throughout this series, every single time we've talked about the passion of the filmmaker, the passion for the characters, the passion for the world they're creating on an emotional level. Avatar has undeniably, James Cameron has a passion for the technicals, has a passion for the actual physical world itself. I don't think he necessarily cares about these characters. I don't think he cares about their arcs. I don't think he necessarily has this passion where he's wanting to do good by Jake Sully and bring this really worthy emotional arc to him. That's never been the MO of Avatar, and that's fine. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. With Top Gun Maverick, you undeniably have a care and love from someone behind the scenes, whether you want to point to Tom Cruise, whether you want to point to the director, whether you want to point to the Tony Scott influence. And the Tony Scott influence is obviously there, and that's going to make us feel a certain type of way that you can't replicate, right? There's real world stuff there. That Iceman scene does not need to go down the way it does. You do not need to give that big of a moment to Iceman, but they do. And it's amazing that they do. But that's because they love that character and they want to give that moment, not just the character, but the actor there and their impact, their moment. I think when you talk about Avatar, I think this is the first film in our Summer of Blockbuster series that we've gotten to, and certainly we'll get to it next week, where we're lacking that emotional passion by the filmmaker who's putting their heart and soul, who's putting themselves on screen with this project in a really emotional way. Even going back to Jaws, we talked about that with Spielberg, the hardships he went through. With Star Wars, we talked about the same thing. Obviously, Lord of the Rings, we talked about the passion. Even to a point, James Cameron... it's similar, I guess, to the conversation we had about Titanic, but I think we were a little bit kinder to Titanic in this angle than we were with Avatar. This is the first one where I see very clearly this emotional disconnect between what is the intention and care and love from the director. Undeniably, it's on the visuals, which works. But compared to Top Gun Maverick, I think there's also a very clear then difference in the reception, very clear difference in what actually comes out on screen, certainly on the emotional impact of the viewing experience. Top Gun Maverick has really great technicals, and we can another day break down all the beautiful aerial shots and the cockpit shots and all that, which are fantastic. Ultimately, that film you come away with, wow, that was an emotional experience in ways, and that's how it hits you. Avatar, you don't come away feeling, wow, that was an emotional hit. You say, wow, that was very pretty. That was very beautiful. I love the CGI. Maybe you're invested in the character arcs. I certainly am. I'm not someone who's like portraying this film. I still really like the movie. But there's undeniably Top Gun Maverick, I have an emotional reaction. Avatar, I do not have an emotional reaction beyond just very basic rudimentary things. And I would say for me, that's the most palpable difference I noticed between the two. Last Jedi, maybe we just, I would never book this, but we maybe need to do a Last Jedi episode one day. Again, we'll never
Oh
do it
God.
because I think that's such a fascinating film when you look at what Rian Johnson's trying to bring to it, for good or for better or for worse. I don't like the film overall. But I think that is where I see a big difference. And I think contextualizing this and building this into our narrative and into our lexicon of blockbusters, looking at the evolution of the blockbuster, we've talked about nearly every episode. We've got really depressed at the end, and I'm sure everyone hated this one, like an hour-long ramble about how lifeless blockbusters are and how sad they are. We're now at the point in the series where we're seeing that in real time. I think this is the first one where we can really point to and
Yeah.
identify this issue. Only going to grow next week. Only going to get worse, because I think even the passion for the world's going to go away very quickly. But for me, I would say that is the big thing. Go for it.
Yeah, I'd love to ask you a bit more question on that, because I think your relationship with this film is a lot more deeper than I am. So I'm genuinely really interested in this. I mean, I would be interested anyway. I'm not just feigning a genuine interest. But why do you think that's the case of this? After 15 years of him implementing craft, putting his life into this venture, waiting to write these characters to make sure they're correct. Why do you think that attribute is associated with what you feel about this film? And do you think, and to just put on a second to that, if you could answer that for me, do you think that's just solely on this, or would you put that on anything else in Cameron's repertoire of filmography?
Well, as I mentioned, I think he's always, I mean, not counting the films I haven't seen. I don't know. I think he did like Piranha 3 or whatever. Maybe that's
You were not missing anything there. Don't worry about that.
I'm going to be wrong with that one. I think this has always been Cameron's interest as a filmmaker. He's never been motivated by necessarily the emotions. I think Titanic, he's like obsessed about this event and the weight of the event, which plays through character emotion. So I think that story naturally lends itself to what he's trying to capture. He definitely just went down in a submarine, saw a cool fish, and wanted to create that. That's the emotional arc here that he's obsessed with and he's built all this for. I think it's a factor you can see throughout Cameron with what interests him. It's never from what I've seen, it's never the characters, it's never the emotions, it's never that heart of the film and that soul of the film in that way. It's always been, what roller coaster experience can we give that is really cool and get your heart pumping on this visual level, which again is fine. I'm not judging Cameron for that. It's just a different mindset of filmmaking.
I don't really have a much great deal to say afterwards, but I sort of agree with you. I think we'll see the Sully family. Namely, I think that we'll probably stop seeing Jake Sully after this, because I think you take that away from that family dynamic that's essentially holding it together. I think that you've got then a really interesting arc, possibly with how that family, who becomes a leader, and then I think you can definitely see that there's some children who will go. I think you can definitely see that the children will probably split up, go different places, and eventually some form of that family will end up on Earth, and it will be sort of a declaration to the United Nations of planet Earth, and to stop what's being happened, and the humans will turn on the other humans. I think you can sort of see where this is going to go in that Shakespearean level. I just we'll get there. I don't see why we won't get to 3 and 4. The materials spread out this long is kind of like fascinating to me, because I don't know if the original Avatar script is called Project 808, which is a slightly different, because Grace survives in it and there's loads of other differences and stuff like that. But it's interesting that this has gone on as long as it has, and a form of where you come down to creative output and the creator. Where does a line stop? Christopher Nolan doesn't add deleted scenes, and the Wachowskis don't add deleted scenes. The film speaks for itself, and I like that. But I also like looking at the work prints that we've seen. I like looking at the Alien 3 work print that I've got, the VHS cut of it. I like looking at the Alien work print. It's interesting to look at the 3 different cuts of Avatar and see that where it felt it was needed and where the story felt impacted and what he would take out and put in. This one is interesting to me because it's the one that doesn't have much material left on the cutting room floor, and then put as much as being put in here as possible. If that's true, and 3 and 4 and 5 are going to be like that, it's an interesting topic to have about how much are people wanting this, which is one thing, but also how much people are going to accept to be able to just take on board as well. Because essentially, we've watched what we have. What I've watched. You've watched 12 hours. I've watched 9. hours of the Avatar, right? And we've watched 2 films. So if you think about it in the long run, and again, you talk about the sequels and stuff. There's a lot for an audience to absorb there, and there's a lot to undertake. It's there's a lot to process there, and I think for an audience, you've got to have a really cultural phenomenon where people absorb it and but it's one of those things where I go back to the Avatar thing is that you know I live in a slightly small town, and so it's not really something I can speak of. But I'd be fascinated to know yours because you've been to the Comic Cons of the world. You live in San Diego. I hope I've not doxed you there. If you want to delete that, please do. But you live close enough to California. You've gone there a few times. Don't you find it interesting how as monumental achievements of these films are, they still haven't quite caught on to the cultural phenomenon that the Star Wars has, the ETs have. Without the iconography, you don't see someone. Um, you don't really see any fan base of this. You don't see the comics have a run. I know I mentioned this before. Please, I hope I'm not reiterating myself or repeating myself. But I still come back to it that where we for a bar the 2009, which I think both of us were like, I'll move on from this. I appreciate there's a video game out of it now that's very lukewarm. I don't even know what it's about. I wouldn't tell you anything. But it's interesting that the comic books, there's very little, like George Lucas after Revenge of the Sith added the Clone Wars for 5 years to keep it in the context of children being able to absorb that and be like, oh, what's next, and get on to the prequels and get on to the sequels and stuff like that. This feels like it's missing a major trick of keeping into the cultural discourse by not being integrated as much, and I think that's a detriment to it, but also a positive. And not to go on to this very long, but I just think it's interesting that when you've got such monumental achievements, Cameron is sort of resigned to like they're going to be 3.5 hours in the cinema. And I'm not saying I want them regulated on television, but why not have a television show between the two? Get it on HBO, have it animated. I don't know, have it like the Clone Wars in a certain style, especially on Disney Plus. And let's watch those 15 years. Let's see how these other dynamics have been doing. I think there's so much texture to absorb. Then I'm not reading a prequel novel. I'm not reading a fucking Avatar book. I'm not doing it. Graphic novels. I'm just not bothered. But I do think a 4-season, 10-hour show, primarily aimed at like kids who are then going to be old enough to watch the come out. It's just a genius idea. But the fact that even with Disney, it's still not a thing. I don't know. I don't know how you feel about it. Do you feel there's a missed opportunity to really dive deep in this, or do you think that's a purposeful thing of not to over absorb an audience because when the time comes, you're not going to watch a 3.5 hour version of the same shit you've watched? Or how do you come down on that then?
I mean, narratively, I can see what you're saying, but God, do I not want a TV show of anything else that's a film. I also think just like James Cameron has no interest, and that's going to be the death of it. But like, and also it takes so much money and it's so much resources to make the Navi, and like, I don't think financially that would make a lot of sense, to be honest. But narratively, I see what you're coming from.
Not even an animated, not even a sense of let's
I
make
guess if you do
something.
animated, I just don't think anyone's gonna. I mean, because also no one cares about. I mean, you mentioned it even. Like no one cares about this on a cultural level. I don't think the issue is we need more Avatar for people to consume. I think they're going because they want the visual experience in the theater.
Right.
They want the spectacle. I don't think anyone would watch an anime style Navi adventure, even if you put out in theaters like Lord of the Rings is doing for some reason.
Oh
Um,
my god.
Even if it's on Disney
Oh.
Plus, I don't think anyone's gonna watch that anyway. So I guess no. I get like and I know where stands, and it's hard for us because we would watch it and we're
Yeah,
engaged in this world.
because
I just
everything
think
I've said the
no one
last two
else cares.
hours would, yeah, every the last 2 hours of me as being such a high road conversation. I don't disagree with you. What do you think? What do you think is the thing that's not making it that cultural social norm? Then what do you think is? Do you think it's purposeful, or do you think it's just? Do you think it just purely is the strictness of It just isn't enough narrative because I don't know. I'm just for
Because no
someone
one
obviously
cares,
who
but
just
there's
loved this
no
series.
characters. There's no personality. Like there's no one is going and like, oh my gosh, Jake Sully, the arc he's going on is so incredible and I'm invested in this. Like people are going and it's literally just like it looks cool. And that's all people are coming away with. No one is like even lying to themselves about this, like they do a lot of films and are being like, this is some spectacle and this is all great, you know. No one's going to this like across the Spider-Verse and being like, oh my god, this is actually brilliant. Like no one's even saying that. They're just saying it looks cool and that's the end of it. So like and it's because when you look at the depth, there isn't really anything that worthwhile. There's no emotional reaction. There's no reason you would relate to Natiri. I'm not like, oh my gosh, I see myself in Natiri to where I stan her. And valid to like the 10 people on Twitter who do. I'm not trying to hate on you at all. I love you for being yourselves. But
Can I ask you a question after this?
I don't see
I,
it. Go for it.
I'm because you mentioned it. Right, there's like it's two. One's quite patronised, but I have to answer this. Right. First of all, do you think anyone's named their child Natiri after these films? And B, how would you how would you respond to that if you found out that someone was like, we called our child Natiri, we were just massive fans of Avatar? Do you think there's like a form of like sadness to that? Do you think that there's because it's such a limited fan base?
Do you
It's kind
think
of
they're
weird.
sad or like am I sad for the child or who
Either I
who
don't either. I would. I don't know. I don't know what to say.
I work in education, so I'm imagining if one of my kids came in, like new kid who just transferred, and this is it's hi, I'm Natiri. I would I would love it, honestly. I feel sad, obviously, for I would say probably the child more so than the parents. It would definitely be. I would be curious what the parents would say to it. Do they regret it? Because like no one caught on. Like, are they doing this just for self fulfillment? Like they love Avatar, so we got our Natiri, or are they doing this for the world and no one cared and they're like, oh, that's awkward and weird. I would just have a lot of questions, I guess, but I would dig. I would think it's so funny. They'd be my favorite student for sure.
Have you been to the Avatar land in? Is it in Disney World? Have you been to that or anything?
No, it's in Florida. I want to go so badly though. But they're building one based on the water park now or the water world near me at Disneyland. So I will be going to that in like 10 years when it opens.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be
Uh,
a really cool land. Everyone who goes loves it. And I'm Navi pilled in the way where like I don't necessarily think these films are the best films in the world, but I do like the world enough to where I would go and have a absolute blast.
fair enough. Fair
Imagine
enough.
just getting high and going to Pandora. I'd be speaking the language. I'd be eating the food.
Yeah.
I'd be having a great time.
Paint yourself blue. You'd love it, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Oh,
I'd be just like,
1,000% be paying myself blue.
you
Had
need
to
to
hold
check
myself back from doing it today,
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah, you need to check ABC News. Carson's on San Diego News. Look a report. The Navi costume. I think it's interesting. Like you see Comic Con and you see people dressing up as like Ewoks and you see like Star Wars and this Deadpool phenomenon. It's like people dressing up as
Oh
that
god.
character, that photographer, but you never see anyone as a Navi, do you? And do you know
No, you
what?
see people as the most elaborate side characters who've been in like one shot of anything, but I've never seen a Navi.
As
Maybe because
Lobo
like
out of Star Wars.
it is a little like weird to dress up as like an indigenous
Well,
culture.
that's it. Yeah, that's
Maybe
it as
that's
well.
it.
Yes, yeah,
I would definitely feel that way if I saw them. I'd be like, that's kind of awkward. But no, they
yeah.
didn't like for Planet of the Apes, they didn't parade them around cities. Like, no.
Well, that's so interesting. The Planet of the Apes thing. God, I can't believe we've got what 3 hours into this and we've not mentioned that. The two franchises are so similar. Technological advancements, good cast, franchise. We've waited a while to see them done, and yet Planet of the Apes franchise is so much more like empowering, impacting, with certain social climates, arcs that are eerily similar to Way of the Water or even Avatar. But Planet of the Apes is like wildly more successful. It's wildly more like accessible. They're both Fox franchises as well. God, that's
I
a
think it
great
all comes down
shout.
to Cameron because like the people behind Planet of the Apes gave Caesar this arc that people love. They gave people reason to invest. Cameron also though decided not to make a film for 15 years because he had to figure out how to do it underwater. So like I think Cameron's worst tendencies probably got out when it came to making this popular. You waited too long. You don't already care about narratives and about character work. Like Planet of the Apes did hook people with that. I see why. I think it all comes back to Cameron, which I don't think like to be clear, everyone can have their own views on filmmaking. I don't think I need to be like, oh, boo Cameron, he didn't do the thing to make it a franchise the best as possible. That's not my goal with cinema. Not that I'm necessarily in love with his ideology with film, but like I do think it's interesting and I appreciate it to a point. But like, yeah, I don't know.
Do you think that Grace's daughter will be the reincarnament of the god that is Enya or Enwa? I'm getting deep into
Awa,
this.
please put some respect on the
I'm
name.
sorry.
I
I'm
believe in
sorry.
it. Sure. Yeah, I would say that's probably likable. I mean, I could think we could probably sit here for 30 minutes and figure out the exact arc of the next 5 films of Avatar films, to be fair. I don't think there's
Well,
going to
let's
be
not
any
do that.
deviation.
Let's not do it
No,
because we
I'm
want
not
the
saying we
audience to
do.
go see it. The audience need
But
to
I'm
see
saying, like,
something new.
again, if we travel back to 2015 with our imaginary Force Awakens episode, like, we could probably say we know the chart of what's going to happen, and we certainly did not know the chart of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
Avatar, if we did that, I personally feel very confident it would actually match what we say. I don't think it's going to have the twists and turns, again, for better or for worse, but we'll see. We'll be back next year to discuss Avatar 3, so
Oh, dear.
Fire and
Book
Ash
it
or
in.
whatever, so it's on the list.
I'll tell you what, right? I promise you this. I'm gonna promise it to the Navi people, to the Navi stands. Ewa, Ewa. You know, my prayer when I go to bed tonight. What I'm going to do on 19th of December 2025, I'm going to go watch it in 3D. I'll go watch it in the experience that it's been programmed to be in. I'm gonna try and go into it with as much positivity than I can do. I'm not going to allow my issues with Way of the Water to feel detriment and going into something that I feel that could be interesting. So don't get me wrong. As much as I have an issue with Way of the Water, and I quite like Avatar, I'm going to go into Fire and Ash. I'm going to go into. I don't know who. I hope they're a rock band. You know, Hall and Oates, Fire and Ash. It's going to be cool. I can't wait for their ukulele solos and stuff. But I'm going to go in it with the most open mindedness that Awa has promised me, and I'm going to go into it just purely on a spectacle level. I hope that I'm going to enjoy it because life is too short for being as fucking negative as I've been on this podcast. And if it wasn't for you enlightening me on stuff and having a debate, which thank you very much for. I don't know if I should thank you for this.
I don't know
Actually,
if you need to thank me for this.
yeah, I
It's
don't think I've
actually
done
valid
anything for
not to
you
thank
here.
me.
Yeah, I don't think I've done anything for you to helpful to your experience of these films, but no, I can't. I'm not waiting another 15 years. That's the one thing I won't be doing.
I just hope those posters around you can be taken down without damaging them, because it's all going to be Avatar soon.
Well, they're in the other room because they don't, you know, they need to be in my Avatar room, the blue room, which ironically is the toilet, but we'll go to sit there. Avatar.
Well, I think that's going to do
I
it
have the
for.
DVD and Blu-ray, by the way. I have both collector's editions. Don't tell me I'm not a stan.
Well, I think we're going to call that for our Avatar double feature. Jack, thank you for joining me for this one. It was definitely an adventure. Summer of Blockbusters concludes next week with our double feature. We're doing another one of Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. I will only be watching one version of each. Jack, do not try to even send me anything. I don't care if you have open mat. I don't care what you have. It's not happening.
Is
I'm
that a
just watching
sign of
them on
what?
Disney Plus.
Is that a sign that I should take of your opinion to be, or is that just an issue
We'll
of?
see.
Oh God!
I don't think I've watched either since in theaters, so
That's
who
going to be a
knows?
really good debate, especially with what's happened now with the new
Yes.
Avengers stuff. I'm fascinated because they
We'll
were
definitely
good
have a
times.
conversation both on we'll definitely
They
have a
were,
conversation on how the MCU evolved, and also we'll have a conversation about wrapping up our thesis on the blockbusters. So it'll be a fun episode. I hope everyone joins us for that. Let's quickly get through question of the week. Asking, what is your number one film from the top 100 all-time box office list worldwide? Obviously, we're talking about blockbusters. We're talking about these big films. I will go first. It probably has to be Jurassic Park or The Lion King. I mean, both are pretty damn good, aren't they? I mean, Top Gun Maverick's on the list. I gave it 5 stars. I love Top Gun Maverick. Oppenheimer's great. Dark Knight is fantastic. But for me, I guess I'll go Jurassic Park. A little throwback to our Patreon episode that you can find at patreon.com/ClapperCastPod. Jack, from this list, what films do you enjoy?
I'm glad you said films, plural. You let me have that then, and I'm doing one for Nick as well. These questions that they're like becoming Sophie's choice. Like the one last week was like, how dare you be able to ask that, and the one before that was like really difficult as well. This was so painful. I actually wanted to do a protest against it, but then I was thinking about it. And I was like, there's actually so many good films in there, but I've just romanticized each one of them, and I've just got three. But there's a story of all three of them weirdly with this. The first one is Skyfall. I remember watching Casino Royale in 2006. 2008 was Quantum of Solace, and all my family went to go watch Skyfall at the cinema in Huddersfield, which is where I went to go watch Maxine, by the way. So there's memories there, and it just felt like a massive occasion. It was a 50th anniversary of Bond as well. It just felt this massive thing, um, where that cinema and British culture felt good for once. We were hosting the Olympics. James Bond was out. The cinemas were busy, and things have not really got better since then. But I thought that's a really good. It's a really good film, really fun film. And the other two are just like childhood, like coming back to it. The first one is The Phantom Menace. I guess still get goosebumps when I think about I watched that at the cinema when I was like 3 or 4 years old, and I was like, I didn't really get it, and that it's lived so long for me, and I don't really see its blind spots. And having to watch like 9 different versions of it last month, I really like just going back to the well, like with the Avatar thing, going back to Phantom Menace after like 15 years of I didn't even know those were films. It's just crazy to think of it. But the one which I think is similar, and it's the one in real time again. It's The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey. When those were announced, and I was like, "Oh, Del Toro, it'll be different." Then Jackson was back involved. I was like, "Oh my god, this could be like my childhood again." I remember watching the Fellowship of the Ring with my family and my sister and my dad. Anyway, I don't think my mom cares about fantasy films, but I remember watching it and watching the Urukai run through the forest at the end, where Aragorn has his last stand with Boromir, and it's also all, and we did the podcast about it as well. And it was like, oh, it's just going back to being a kid again. And then watching The Hobbit. I was at college at the time. I was 16, I think. Maybe I'd just gone 17 in 2012. I probably would have been probably 16. No, I probably would have been. It had been the year I turned 17. Not that it matters that much, but it was like I'm watching something again into a franchise where like, I fell in love with cinema, and it was just so impacting to be like into my 16-year-old getting to a different era of my life with a lot more trials and tribulations. Life comes a lot harder to you, but when you get into the 16, 17, 18 year olds era, but that was like a film where I just transported back to like just didn't nothing mattered, and all these three films were like just took me away to like a time where it just felt good to be in the cinema. And ironic enough, two of the three are not considered to be great features, but I just felt like at the time for them it just felt really good to be transported with a blockbuster back to a time, not necessarily of nostalgia, but of just it just doesn't matter about anything else. Just enjoy it. And I've learned for a long time that I don't really care the masses who don't dislike those films. If I like it, I'll like it. If I don't like it, I don't like it. I think that comes with age. I fucking sound like I'm 50, but I think you come to that conclusion. Like I don't want, and I think it's about this advertising. I don't want people to think because I dislike it that I disagree with Carson. Like I look, if anyone, I'm quite close with Carson. I love Carson to pieces. We're like brothers, separate by birth almost. With the taste, everything is eerily similar. We've got Missoula things in common. It's dead weird. We need to have a DNA thing one day. But I don't want you to think or anyone else thinking that like it's a personal attack. It's just a personal thing. Not personal. Sorry, it's just a personal thing with the films, not with the critic. But I'm glad that Avatar worked for you. I'm glad. I'm glad that you know you get to go to a cinema and you're like fucking that's amazing. And you know it happens to me occasionally, but with different things. But yeah. But it'd be those
the
three.
Clapper the ClapperCast Navi Nation at least can believe in themselves because we have a
Yeah,
large section, I'm sure, of Avatar stands. So thank
yeah.
you for saying that. Let's get to our question or our rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently that we haven't talked about on the podcast already? I'll go quickly because outside of watching 12 hours of Avatar, I
Mm,
only watched one film this week. And it was because this box office list and our question of the week, I loaded it up and I should be at 100 films out of 100 films on the letterbox list. I've seen them all, but it said 99. And I was like, what happened? What did I miss? Like, what happened? And I loaded it up. I looked at it. and Despicable Me 4 got into the list. So at least unlike Nick, who had no reason to watch it, I did watch Despicable Me 4 this week. Not a good movie, shockingly. Probably one of the most worthless features I've ever seen. Normally, even with like terrible kids movies, there's some point, there's some like message you're trying to get across, even if it's basic, even if it's badly told. There's some moral, there's some purpose to what is on screen. Even maybe a moral lesson a character has to learn to overcome the bad guy at the end or something. There is nothing like that here. It is completely filler. Could have been written by AI. It's just random prompts. What if the minions were superheroes? Okay, I guess they're superheroes now. That doesn't really tie into anything, but valid, go off. What if you have this drama where the mom works as a hair person doing hairstylist and they accidentally make a rich woman bald and the woman's mad? Okay, that doesn't really go into anything, but okay. I don't know. I didn't expect much from this film, but it was pretty awful, so I didn't like it. Jack, what have you seen this week?
Well, you didn't hate it, so that's a positive. Do you know? After trying to uplift this conversation, I'm going back down to the misery here. Um, I've watched a bit of the alien stuff, so I want to keep that out of it. But I watched like the work print of Prometheus, which I thought was fascinating. I can't remember if I said this last week. I don't think I did. My dad's had surgery, so I've been like spending a little bit of time with him just so he doesn't go mad. And I've been watching some films with him, and we watched Fly Me to the Moon, the Channing Tatum Scarlett Johansson feature. Um, how that got a cinematic release and how that's just like it's been reprogrammed quite clearly as a television show into a film. There's 2/3 of that film being one thing, and it takes a Stanley Kubrick moon landing twist to the final third. It's almost 2.5 hours long, which I thought was utterly utterly ridiculous. Very, very poor. No chemistry, no charisma. Not very fun whatsoever. In anticipation of The Crow, I finished my Crow watch along, and this one I watched. I can't keep a straight face. Even this one, The Crow: Wicked Prayer, which stars Edward Furlong, Tara Reid, and Dennis Hopper, Marcus Strong of the Matrix family, and Tito Ortiz and Danny Trejo's in it as well as a kid whose girlfriend gets murdered by a satanic cult because he wants to become the devil and he becomes the Crow, and it's literally Edward Furlong as a goth, and it's just like it's so far from the Brandon Lee film. It's so far from like the underwhelming sequels. It's actually painful to watch, and I just felt compelled to finish them. But it's terrible. Um, I'll end on a pretty interesting one. I think you'll find fun. But just before that, I did watch the Paul Feig critically acclaimed Jackpot on Amazon Prime. Whew, that is one of the worst films I've ever seen, and perhaps one of the worst films this year, undoubtedly. But it's so tonally blasé. It's like the most tongue-in-cheek, farcical satire, and it's like people dropping f bombs. Machine Gun Kelly turns up. It's the most AI documentative about write a satire screenplay about capitalism and uh, uh, economic greed in California. Bang! There we go. John Cena, Aquafina, Samu losing it, and I think it's terrible. Um, Machine Gun Kelly's like horrific, and it's just one of those things where it's like genuinely repulsive to watch. There was one film I did watch, and it was sort of just by chance, really. And I watched it, and I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." And then I read about it, and I was like, "Oh my god!" I can't remember if you've seen this, and I'd be fascinated to know if you have. You haven't, and it's got horrific reviews. Jacob Flash hated it. Oliver Swift hated it. Chris Santon hated it. All these people were friends of the family, friends of the show, and it's Russell Crowe in The Exorcism. Okay, bear with me here, right? Bear with me. On the surface, this is tripe. It is tripe. It is a guy who is an alcoholic who is going on a film set, and because he's a prick, essentially with his daughter, and his life, he's made some mistakes. An alcoholic, he becomes this whole production is haunted, right? And then it goes as much as you think it's going to go. Like you get to the same end. It's like the Exorcist stuff and blah blah blah. And then I was like, "There's something about that." My ingenuity came up. I was like, "There's something about that. I must read about it." And it was filmed in 2019 and couldn't get a distributor because of certain references. And I was like, "Oh my god, what do you mean references? I hope this has not got a lurid past." No, quite the contrary. Are you ready for this? This film is directed by the son of Jason Miller, who was the priest in The Exorcist. This film is essentially his meta horror feature about the making of The Exorcist now and how the actual film is cursed and his father lost himself in trying to be within wanting to be an actor, wanting to be a father, and then losing himself to alcohol, which is what actually happened to Jason Miller. Which and I believe he actually, if I'm not mistaken, had wet brain syndrome because of alcoholism, which is a terrible thing to have. It's like dementia, Alzheimer's for an alcoholic. It's horrific. The memory just depletes. And it's all about the perspective. You sort of see it, and it's like, oh my god, like he's making a film about the sins of his father, trying to like work through this and the issues that he brings home, and the issue he has with this child, which is obviously played by Ty Simpkins, which is Ryan Simpkins' sister. I believe them, but they look weirdly alike as well. But it's all about that issue about uh, Jason Miller, sorry, son, having to go through that and explore the issues of his father through a production. But they can't name The Exorcist. But how the film is built, it's very interesting. Like the sets are eerily similar. How the camera cuts through the building. And it essentially opens like The Exorcist. It's fascinating to watch, and nobody seems to have caught on to that. It's like this weird subtextual meta love letter about like he loves his father and understands the issues he's had, and he sort of recontextualizes it within this production of remake of The Exorcist, and about how the issues of stress about the productions are, and the issues of having demons that are actually real. Fascinating stuff. Nobody seems to have like got it, and to me, I was like, "Oh shit, this is actually really personal." It's so conventional though. Once you go past those ideas of like genre convention and the archetype characters, and it blossoms them to something really quite interesting. It's just a shame it hasn't been sort of built like that, but obviously it can't, because it can't have the references to the Warner Brothers product, especially with what's happened with the David Gordon Green thing. Um, I would be fascinated for any Exorcist fan to watch that. But the guy's dad's called Russell Crowe's character's called Anthony Miller. Like it's all just daughter's called Lee Miller. Like obviously the director's called Joshua John Miller. His dad's Jason Miller. Like it's very impacting, very emotional. Once you see that it's a deeper meaning. I thought it was quite well crafted, and I think to get that out there through film, I thought was very engaging. Although I'd be fascinated to know your experience. It's got 1.8 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Classic. I'm fucking here for it. But yeah, interesting stuff. It's only 96 minutes as well, but it was a feature where I was like, I'm just going to watch random things. And then it just came up on Amazon. I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'll watch it. I didn't mind the Pope's Exorcist, but I was like, oh, this is highbrow horror disguised as corporate convention, and it's ultimately sort of been pressed as such. But yeah, I'd love to read more about it if I can find out the reviews if anyone got it. But yeah, give it people out there, give it a watch if you can. Prepare for Avatar 3 by just watching things like The Exorcism. 19,000 times.
I hate that you've made it to where I have to watch The Exorcism because I wasn't planning on it. But I
Yeah,
will
I
definitely
mean,
watch
I
it.
hope, yeah, I hope that it's not a journey wasted. But terrible, terrible features this time. I've not watched anything good. I've got to talk to you about something off air, but I'll mention that next week as well. But I've been watching something. I can't announce it
Oh.
now, but I'll tell you off air. But it sort of took my time up rather than watching some films. So, but
Mhm.
yeah, a terrible week for me. Terrible week. Saved by
It
the
happens. Everyone
Cordell.
strikes out at some point.
Yeah.
I'm shocked the Crow, whatever it was, didn't deliver. But Oh well.
Wicked prayer, Carson. I
I've
hope you're
never seen
watching it
any,
for prep.
so
Well, you'll be watching it for prep, I'm sure.
ladies and gentlemen, we will not have a the Crow episode. Just FYI, sorry. Um, with that, I think we're going to do it for today's episode. Where can we find you on social media, Jack?
You can find more chaotic ramblings, not that you probably want to, on Letterboxd and Twitter with the username at Jak-Luke Sharp. I've been watching a lot of Alien stuff recently, a lot of work print, so I'm going to do some deeper thought reviews, pinpoints, and I've got some Star Wars stuff to do, and again stuff like more in-depth reviews about not more Star Wars, just the Star Wars I watched. I've cut it off. If anyone, I don't know if we mentioned that, I've cut the fucker off. I watched Attack of the Clones. I don't want to do any more for a little bit, but yeah. But thank you very much for inviting me on. I know that sometimes it's just sort of me recontextualizing with myself. But I love having a chat with you, Carson. I love being invited on here. Every week's amazing. I love my Sunday evenings doing it. 12 hours of Avatar. You can't do that anywhere else and it not feel worthless. It felt really meaningful to have a chat about it. And I'm glad that talking to someone who loved that franchise, it's made me want to watch the special edition cut, which I didn't think I would be doing. So thank you very much for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
No worries, buddy. And you can find me on Twitter at BP_movie reviews, Letterboxd, just Carson Timar. Thank you so much for joining us again. Next week, we will be back to discuss our double feature of Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame as we finish our Summer of Blockbuster series on what I assume is going to be a glorious high note of finding 2 5-star features that make us fall in love with cinema again. With that, thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.